Good evening and welcome to everyone to the ordinary meeting of Council on the 14th of August 2018, which is now open. I'd like to advise members of the public gallery that this meeting is being recorded on live stream on the internet. The recording will be available on Council's website. Gallery attendees are advised that their presence may be recorded. I'd also like to request that members of the gallery switch off their mobile phones to silent mode during tonight's meeting, please. Our regular attendees and watchees on the live stream may notice that some differences in how tonight's meeting will run. At the last council meeting on the 24th of July, council endorsed a new meeting procedure protocol which has been gazetted in the State Government Gazette and is now officially in effect. Some of the changes are quite subtle and others will be more obvious as we move through the agenda tonight. So if the business of the meeting seems to be a little bit different, that's the reason why it has been changed in our protocols. On behalf of Moonee Valley City Council, I'd also like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders that might be here with us today. Apologies, councillors. I don't believe we have any apologies this evening, but Councillor Serace has sought an extension to her leave for another month of absence through from the 28th of July until the 28th of August. So councillors, can I please have a mover and a seconder that Councillor Serace be granted another month of absence of leave, please? Councillor Lawrence? Councillor Marshall? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Confirmation of minutes. Councillors, can I please have a mover and a seconder that the minutes from the ordinary meeting of Council held on Tuesday the 24th of July 2018 be confirmed? Councillor Lawrence. Do I have Councillor Nation? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Declarations of conflict. Does any councillor have a conflict of interest on any item on tonight's agenda? No? Thank you. Councillors, we now have a special presentation this evening and I'd like to suspend standing orders so that the presentation can take place. But I'd firstly like to acknowledge that we have some special guests here with us tonight, and one is Miss Judy Madigan, former Speaker of the Legislative Assembly and former State Member for Essendon. So councillors, can I please have a mover and a seconder that standing orders be suspended? Councillor Marshall, Councillor Sharp. I'll put that to the vote. Carried. Thank you. So I will come up to the front for the presentation. Councillors, ladies and gentlemen, tonight is a very special occasion as the members of the 58th Battalion present to Council the restored Book of Remembrance. The book contains the names of the officers of the 58th Battalion of the Australian Imperial Force who died in France during the First World War. This book was on loan to the Essendon Historical Society and was unfortunately damaged in the fire at the Courthouse Museum in June 2016. It was salvaged from the building the day after the fire, suffering major water damage as well as some damage for scoring and soot. It has been restored by a conservation team at the Grimward Centre of Melbourne University, and tonight is now being presented back to Council where it will remain in our care. I would also like to welcome Lieutenant Don Blacksby, President of the 58th Battalion 32nd Infantry Battalion Association, to tell us more about the history of the Book of Remembrance.
Thank you, Mayor, councillors, distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen. Tonight it gives me great pleasure to make this presentation on behalf of the 58th 32nd Battalion of our Battalion Book of Remembrance to the City of Moonee Valley. This Book of Remembrance contains the name of 30 officers and 585 non-commissioned officers and men of the 58th Battalion Australian Imperial Force who died for Australia in France during the Great War, 1914 to 1918. He was originally commissioned and presented to our old battalion by Councillor William Royal, JP, of Essendon City Council on the 11th of November 1935. William Royal was a councillor for over 20 years and also served as mayor. There are 91 pages in the book made of vellum. That's either quality goat skin or sheepskin, with all names handwritten in Indian ink by Mr. L.G. Darcy using an Old English style font. The cover is black leather with gold letters stamped in the outer cover. The book was bound by P.C. Harris, whose family still operates a bookbinding business in Brunswick today. Amongst the names of the officers and men of the battalion who died during World War I are names like Ablett, Lockwood, Lovett, Madden, Plant, Rogers, Rollins and Westgarth, who are related to members of our current association or are linked with this community. This book of remembrance was on display in its brass case at the old drill hall further up the street, and from 1967 displayed in the foyer of the brick building called Menin Barracks. The book was treated with the utmost respect and reverence by the Citizens Military Forces and Army Reserve soldiers who have paraded and trained in those barracks. Traditionally, soldiers of the 58th Battalion and later the 1st Battalion, the Royal Victoria Regiment, would use white gloves to turn the page before commencing their training parade so that a different page was displayed each week. The book was a constant reminder to soldiers of our battalion of the deeds of the men of the 58th Battalion, Australian Imperial Force, who gave their lives for Australia in France during World War I. During an Army Reserve reorganisation, ownership of this book was transferred to our association, who repaired the brass display case and also paid to repair the book binding. From 2014, the book was then on loan to the Essendon Historical Society and was displayed in their courthouse museum until the building caught fire in 2016. Fortunately, the Book of Remembrance was saved. It did not burn, it was inside the locked brass case. However, it did suffer some heat, smoke and water damage, causing the vellum pages to curl and the Indian ink to run and smear. Quick action saw this priceless book handed to the Victorian Public Records Office to see if it could be repaired. The Melbourne University Grimwade Centre team of paper conservators saved this book by freezing the pages to stop the pages going mushy and to stop the ink running, then drying them page by page, stretching the pages back into shape, then reassembling and binding the book. This book survived the fire and, just like a fiery phoenix, has been fully restored at great expense, luckily by insurance, and we thank the Prov for their exceptional professional restoration work where you cannot identify any damage to it at all. An amazing job. Today we are presenting the book to the City of Moonee Valley. It will be displayed in Memorabilia Corner outside the Council Chamber, besides the Queen's and regimental colours of the 58th Battalion and the 1st Battalion, the Royal Victoria Regiment. I ask you to look at those and consider the battle honours that are listed on those, that those battalions won in World War I and also World War II for the Royal Victoria Regiment. From time to time, descendants of the men of the 58th Battalion and some citizens of Moonee Valley may wish to visit their relatives' names in the book. Our association, being the owner, was privileged as custodian to care for the book and the brass cabinet. Tonight, we are privileged to present the Book of Remembrance into the care of the City of Moonee Valley as a long-term loan. Thank you.
Yeah, and we'll just be unveiling the book now.
you want me to tell you how I saved people?
Yes.
It's a funny story, because when the courthouse burnt down the day after, I suddenly realised this was still there. So I went back to get it, and of course the Historical Society didn't want me to go in because I didn't have a hard hat on. But I did know there was an old hard hat left over from World War I in one of the drawers. So I got that, put it on the floor, and said to the Historical Society's having a heart attack, thinking the roof's going to fall on me. But as soon as I bent over to pick it off, the hard hat fell off anyway. And it was exceptionally wet, so I dropped it the first time, so it's very lucky to be here, and Rob did a great job. So there you go.
Fantastic. Thank you. Take a photograph. Cool. All the gentlemen for the medals, please come forward to the photo.
Group shot.
Group shot.
Yeah, do a group shot.
Come on, Bob.
Alright, everyone. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Councillors, can I please have a mover and a seconder to resume standing orders, please? Councillor Sharp, Councillor Nation. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried. Next item on tonight's agenda is petitions and joint letters. Councillors, I believe we do have one petition being tabled tonight. Councillor Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, I have a petition here that has been signed by 707 local residents, business owners and customers of Union Road, Ascot Vale. And this petition requests a review of the 60-minute parking restriction that's currently in place. We also have an online petition which was supported by 354 people, and that's also being tabled. And there will be further correspondence on the same issue. I also note I have a letter from Bill Shorten, a federal member for Maribyrnong, in support of the petition and what is proposed. And I do acknowledge Brent, the owner of Paramount Health and Fitness, who is here tonight and was the person who forwarded the petition.
Okay.
Yes, and I would move then that Council receives and notes the online and hard copy petition regarding parking in Union Road, Ascot Vale. 2, refers this matter to the Director of Planning and Development for investigation and reporting back to Council. And 3, advises the petition organiser accordingly.
Thank you, Councillor. Next item is public questions.
Seconder, Mayor, for that one?
Oh, sorry, yes, we do. We need a seconder.
No.
We don't normally have a motion for petitions, and so I need to so we don't normally have a motion for petitions, it always stays.
Well, that's what I... Do we need a motion for petitions or...?
Just as a point of clarification, perhaps to the Governance Officer, is this reflective of our new meeting procedures, is it? Because we don't usually have a...
You, Mr. Mayor. Yes, this is a new process that has been introduced as part of the meeting process, and for any petitions that council has received, as a matter of course, we'll require a resolution to resolve and accept.
Okay, then I will take.
Sorry, I must excuse myself. If that can please be recorded.
Absolutely, and we'll record that. Yeah. New meeting procedures, councillor, that's why. Yeah. Okay, so I have a mover in councillor Marshall. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Cusack. Councillors, does anybody need to speak to this item? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Could someone get Councillor Sharp back in? Thank you. I'll leave that with you, Lee. Thank you, councillor. As you can see, we have some slight changes to the public question time section as well of our council meeting. So the person asking the question must be present in the gallery. They will be asked to come forward to the lectern to read out their question to the relevant council officer who will provide a response. Each person is allowed to ask 2 questions and no further questions or debate will be permitted after that. I now ask the Director of Planning Development, Natalie Ryder, whether we have received any public questions tonight.
Yes, we have, Mr Mayor. We've received 2 questions from Mr Brett Lavery, and if Mr Lavery could please come to the lectern and read those questions.
Go ahead. Okay, thank you. I represent Union Road Traders on behalf of Parramatta Health and Fitness Club, and it's in regards to the parking restrictions. So question 1 was, we would like to know how the 60-minute time restrictions on Union Road is a proactive and logical amount of time for people to patronise several businesses in one outing, and whether it could be increased to 2 hours, maybe 90 minutes. That was question 1.
Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor. So extensive consultation was undertaken in 2014, and on the basis of that consultation, many changes were made to the parking restrictions in Union Road and the side streets. And at that time, it was determined that the 60-minute restriction was the appropriate amount of time. What we'd really do is encourage you to work through the Traders Association just to make sure that your request is shared by others and has the support of the traders generally. So working through the Trader Association, the Union Road Traders would be a great place to start in terms of getting that support and then us undertaking our necessary investigations.
Yeah. Am I allowed to respond to that anyway? No? Okay. Question 2?
Yes, thanks.
And the second question was more to do with the installation of the electronic sensors. We're not against it, we're all for it. And in fact, it's just now that the psyche of people has changed just due to the fact that they know they're accountable from minute to minute, which we've been told that the installation of the electronic sensors is to gather information about parking habits, etc., and to generate more turnover of cars. How will this information be quantified regarding the impact on businesses of Union Road?
Thank you for your question. The most exciting part about the installation of these sensors is that people are going to have access to an app where they can see remotely, they can monitor the progress of their parking. So if anyone's been into the City of Melbourne, they have a similar type app, and you can get a notification when there's 15 minutes to go or 10 minutes to go. It will also allow people in advance of arriving at the centre to have a look at the available parking and travel directly to those areas where there is available parking rather than circling around. So as when we switch it on, so at the moment we're installing the pods and they're not yet switched on. As we switch those on and we begin to gather data, we'll have a lot better understanding of the occupancy rates of the parking spots, the length of time people stay. We'll be able to make more informed decisions that monitor the length of time, and we'll be able to liaise with the Trader Association in terms of providing that information, which will hopefully help businesses to run their business.
Thank you. Thank you for those questions.
Thank you.
You may sit down, Mary. Thank you. I might take this opportunity to remind everyone about the next public forum, which will be held on the 21st of August. So if you have any supplementary questions or any further questions, please come to the forum on the 21st of August, where you'll be able to ask questions and we'll be able to give you answers straight away, or if we don't have the answers, we'll take them on notice and provide you with a written response from our officers. So that's right here. So on the 21st of August, if you come back here at 6:30, you'll be able to ask any supplementary questions. 6 o'clock, is it? 6 o'clock. Sorry, my mistake, 6 o'clock. Public forum is a great opportunity for members in the community to engage with the councillors and play a role in the decision-making process. Residents are invited to register, to come along and present and raise any questions on any matters or issues that they would like to discuss with councillors, or to ask any questions directly to any councillor or any officer. So the public forum starts at 6 o'clock and runs through till about 6:45. Thank you. Reports from special... Yes. These new meeting procedures are sort of... It's the first one. Yeah, it's yours. Did you find it? Okay, council reports. Councillors, 10.1 on tonight's report is on 320 to 322 Racecourse Road, Flemington. Demolition works and construction of a multi-storey dwelling. Councillors, do I have a motion? Oh, Councillor Cusack.
Mayor, I'd like to move an alternative motion to the one that's in the papers for tonight's meeting.
Would you like to read it out, please?
I hope most of it's up there, but for those that are tuning in at home, the council issue a notice of decision to refuse to grant a permit in relation to planning permit application number MV 958-2017 for demolition works and construction of a multi-storey building in commercial 1 zone and heritage overlay HO 25. Use of the land for a residential hotel, serviced apartments, and a reduction in car parking requirements at number 320 to 322 Racecourse Road, Flemington, Lot 1, TP 3939 72A, in accordance with the following grounds of refusal. 1. The proposed building height, scale and massing fails to meet overarching objectives and strategies of clause 15.01-2S building design of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme, and would result in an urban design outcome that fails to positively contribute to the local context and enhance the public realm. 2. The proposal fails to meet the objectives and strategies contained in clause 15.03-1S of the Heritage Conservation and clause 21.06-2 Heritage of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme, and would result in a development that is not sympathetic and does not integrate with surrounding heritage buildings. 3. The proposed building height, scale and massing fails to meet the objectives and strategies of clause 21.06-4 urban design of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme, as it fails to appropriately respond to its location and surrounding context. 4. The development would present a visually dominant and unsympathetic build from the form to the area and will have an adverse effect on the residential amenity of the neighbouring land. 5. The proposal fails to provide sufficient car parking as required under clause 52.06 car parking of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme, and would exacerbate car parking problems in the surrounding area. 6. The proposed vehicle access does not provide for safe and efficient vehicular movement, which will result in adverse safety impacts. And finally, 7, which is the proposal will cause adverse traffic and pedestrian safety impacts on the surrounding area, including the laneway and existing road network, which will be substantial and unreasonable.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll see if I can find you a seconder. Councillor Marshall. Councillor Cusack, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks for the opportunity to move an alternative motion. I think that this motion is pretty self-explanatory in so many ways. The examination of the proposal by the developer raises a number of shortfalls that were very apparent to the community in the first instance, and consequently we had a very strong representation from our local community in the Flemington area about what the issues were with this, and in fact what you see reflected in this motion is very much what the community was saying. But any substantial inspection of the area and clearly a consideration of the history of the area makes this motion stand up. Just quickly, in the first point, and adding to that, I've really failed to see how we achieve any urban design outcome that positively contributes to the area when we're talking about 70 apartments, 66 of them are single bedders, and consequently, where is the question? Oh, how does this answer the question about diversity in housing? How does this answer how the typical Flemington area is serviced well by this sort of proposal? The next part of this is how it impacts just onto Racecourse Road as a setting in its own right, and as a building design, it is an unfavourable outcome. The second point is clearly around the heritage of the area. We have strong heritage values in Pin Oak Crescent, Norwood, and throughout the rest of that surrounding area. If you just fan out a little bit, there is clearly a themed approach to heritage across all of that part of Flemington, and to start to push into the retail sector, which has always been nominated as important heritage, and there are so many buildings in there that are of significance. To place this in the middle of them will have a detrimental effect. This is backed up by the fact that we have also in the past been successful in VCAT in determining that heritage across the road or nearby is impacted by these sorts of buildings. I note Maribyrnong Road as one instance of that in the past. The question also about the height, scale and massing goes without saying. This is an area that is very much around the 2- and 3-storey development, and to think that you can put in 7 levels and disguise it as something that ain't there is not on. It is always going to be part and parcel of the neighbourhood, and an overpowering statement against all of the other buildings and that are sited in the general area. The development is also affects residential amenity in the neighbouring land, and it is critical to think about this. There is a lot of very small single-fronted terraces, don't have car parks. They rely very much on being able to use the laneways to do the traditional thing that people in Flemington have always done, and that's to do the goat tracks between home and down to the shopping centre. This will tip that completely. It is the Flemington studies in Flemington show that over 60% of the people who use the shops in the area or the library or whatever like that are pedestrians. They walk to their places. They don't drive there. If you are going to create obstacles for that activity, then you are also creating long-term problems in relation to how our community actually really works and the amenity of the area. Final things are around, obviously, car parking. If you've ever tried to get a car park in Pin Oak Crescent, Norwood, or any of that surrounding area, and I don't care how many pods we put in or how much information we have, it's always crowded, and it's never going to be anything other than that. And so we need to have a development that is sympathetic to that very critical issue. Safety is important here. I've already mentioned the high level of pedestrian traffic. I've already mentioned the fact that we're looking at a long-term plan around how we use alternative transport like cycling and so on like that. And this proposal will do nothing to support that safety and the movement of individuals through the area. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Marshall.
I admire that perfect timing. So this is obviously a large site on Racecourse Road, compared to many that are on Racecourse Road, and I think we all acknowledge the non-contributory nature of what's on site, and I certainly can understand why the Heritage Advisor has no issue with it being demolished. In light of that, and obviously the proximity to public transport, there will be a development go on site, and I think we are all acknowledging that. But this one, for 70 serviced apartments at the height proposed and the bulk and scale proposed, for me is one that I can't support. And I certainly do acknowledge that the applicant has, following the consultation meeting, made some amendments, informally amended the plans, and I certainly think that the facade is much improved to what it was. And also note, as Councillor Cusack referred to, that there was a very large group at the consultation meeting, and it's important for people to know that their concerns haven't been ignored, but some of them are concerns that are just not planning matters, and there was significant concern over construction management, the demolition of the building and how that would affect adjacent buildings, and if something was to go on site, that would need to be dealt with through the appropriate processes. But for me, acknowledging the changes to the plans that have been reflected in the conditions of the proposed by the council officers, there are a number of underlying issues that have just not been addressed, I think, satisfactorily. And Councillor Cusack touched on that issue of the properties on Norwood Street within the heritage overlay and what would be a very significant impact, in my view, to the sightlines of the people. They're narrow properties, they've got smallish backyards, and I think it would be very significant, both the amenity impacts and also the potential for the heritage overlay more generally to be diminished. A particular concern to me was the fact that we have an internal referral process, and in this instance I feel like 2 internal referrals have pretty much been ignored or glossed over. More often than not, as councillors, we find ourselves in the situation that when reports come up to us, that the internal referrals are either supportive in whole or they are supportive with conditions of an application. But in this instance, we have not 1 but 2 of our internal referrals that have expressed, in one instance, in the instance of traffic, an inability to support the project, and in the other, with heritage, concerns that have been expressed that have been picked up in some parts, but not picked up overall. And for me, I think that I very much feel the same in relation to the heritage elements, that it is just still too high and that bulk is too great. And I think the Heritage Advisor recommended a reduction in height of between 2 and 3 stories, and I think that that would have been more appropriate, and a range of other changes too in relation to setbacks, some of which have been picked up, but there is that real concern for the potential to impact on the properties within the heritage overlay.
I'll have to wind you up, Councillor.
Almost done, Mayor, if you'll indulge me just for a minute longer. One thing I do have to address, because I can never resist a chance to do this, there's a comment in the report about the abandonment of the structure plan 5 years ago. I wonder if it will still be mentioned in 5, 10, 15 years' time. And I know obviously it wasn't a plan that council officers were pleased that was abandoned, but it was obviously one that there was a significant amount of community concern, and rightly so. Because I certainly reflect on my decision making often, and there have been some decisions that I would have made differently, but I can tell you now there is not a single bit of doubt in my mind that the decision to rezone most of Flemington as the activity centre zone, so a zone for high density, to abandon that plan was the right one. So it would have been an absolute disaster, and while it might have been a developer and planner nirvana to have all of that precinct be rezoned for high density, it was absolutely the right one. So look, as I said, I acknowledge that there are elements of this that work, but there are elements to me that are concerning, and certainly we're also of concern to our internal referrals.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Would any other councillor like to say? Councillor Nation.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll obviously speak in favour of this refusal and concur with my fellow ward councillors that this is too much for this particular site. Councillor Marshall articulated those heritage notes perfectly, which was a reduction in 2 to 3 stories would probably, from a heritage perspective, mean this was a suitable or an acceptable outcome. 7 stories is far too much for that site, and you only have to look in the appendices that visual from Norwood Street and this glass tower just rising, and I think you see 3 or 4 stories. So it's not even the people in the backyards of Norwood Street that Councillor Marshall spoke about. It's people that are on Norwood Street and then further up the hill as well, because we know there's that incline the further towards Kent Street that you go. The report also, I think, actually sums it up the best, where it says that once conditioned, this application meets or has an adequate level of compliance. So once conditioned, it has an adequate level of compliance. But if you look at the conditions, that is basically saying that once you reduce and modify the built form, delete a level, increase setbacks on basically every floor, modify the external presentation, you change the wall heights, then it's adequately compliant. That shows you, as presented to us as an application without the conditions, this is completely unsuitable for the site. The idea of service departments in a small scale, I think, is okay, and I think it probably is something that may be needed close to our train stations. But as Councillor Cusack said, dumping 70 on that site, 70 service departments, 1 bed, or 66 one-bedders, is just too much surplus of one particular stock. And the impact, or the subsequent amenity impacts it will have on everyone living around the area are obviously quite obvious. The other thing that really concerns me about this one is the report does speak about the need, in the conditions it speaks about the need for exemplary urban design outcomes on this site and for this site, and that's part of a condition. Yet in the notes in the report, it states that there's no objection subject to refinement and massaging of the building. I would say that the conditions are basically giving it a complete facelift, not just a subtle massaging, and the way that this application has been presented to us is inferior, or is an inferior design for that site. One thing that I will speak positively about is that there is a condition for an illuminated 3D sculptural artistic element, which I have no idea what that is or if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but that was something unique that I saw in the report, and I wonder if those 3D illuminated sculptures will pop up in other conditions here and there. But this one's unacceptable for this site, and I hope our fellow councillors support this refusal.
I too look forward to that illuminated sculpture as well.
Hopefully not. Hopefully not.
Councillors, any other councillor like to say a few words? Councillor Cusack, would you like to close?
Just very briefly, Mayor. I think that thank you for the contributions from fellow councillors. The question here is that we're not talking about stopping the process or a process to build something of value or worth in Flemington, and there's clearly an idea around this that there is an opportunity to create a service department stroke business type of proposition where people can come in and move through Flemington and enjoy the facilities. There is always the question, though, when I referred to the 66, it was a question of a high level of turnover of a transient population that doesn't necessarily have a connection or want to have any connection with the local area. They come in, they go out. I, for one, reference this back to the problems that we had and have had at 1 Ascot Vale Road, where there was a similar sort of arguments put up. And at present, I'm not seeing any positive stuff come out of 1 Ascot Vale Road, and it's linked to, obviously, the racing carnival. So there's no reference back to our local area. It lacks a cohesive connection to the community, and it has no great representation into the street and so on like that. There will be some players who will win out of it, maybe in the hospitality game, but at the end of it all, it's not a good solution by way of safety, amenity, and respectfulness for their heritage.
Thank you, councillor. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Next report on tonight's agenda is on page. No page. The next report is on 10.2 on tonight's agenda, and is a planning application for the construction of 3 dwellings at 53 Hayes Road, Strathmore. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, I'd like to move an alternative motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, councillor. Would you like to read out your alternative?
Thank you for the opportunity, Mr Mayor. That council issue a notice of decision to refuse to grant a permit in relation to planning permit application number MV/55/2018 for the construction of 3 dwellings at 53 Hayes Road, Strathmore, lot 321 on LP 012420, in accordance with the following grounds of refusal. 1. The proposal fails to meet the overarching objective and the strategies of Clause 15.01-1S, Urban Design, and Clause 15.01-5S, Neighbourhood Character of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme, and will result in a development that fails to appropriately respond and contribute to the neighbourhood character. 2. The visual bulk, scale, form and layout of the proposal fails to meet the objectives and strategies of Clause 21.06-1, Neighbourhood Character, and Clause 21.06-4, Urban Design, as it does not respect or contribute to the preferred character of the Garden Suburban 6 Precinct and fails to appropriately respond to its location and surrounding context. 3. The proposal fails to satisfy the following standards contained within Clause 55, 2 or more dwellings on a lot of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme, and does not achieve an acceptable outcome in terms of the following objectives. A. Clause 55.02-1, Neighbourhood Character. B. Clause 55.03-1, Street Setback. C. Clause 55.03-4, Permeability. D. Clause 55.03-8, Landscaping. And E. Clause 55.04-5, Overshadowing Open Space. 4. The development would present a visually dominant and unsympathetic built form to the area and will have an adverse effect on the residential amenity of the neighbouring land. 5. The proposal would exacerbate on-street parking problems in the surrounding area. 6. The proposal will cause adverse traffic impacts on the surrounding area which will be substantial and unreasonable. And 7. The proposal creates an unwanted precedent for the development in the local area.
Thank you, councillor. I'll see if I can find you a seconder. Councillor Gauchi-Merici. Councillor Lawrence, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The proposal at 53 Hayes Road, Strathmore, has a built form that's both massive and bulky in relation to the surrounding area and the buildings of that area, with the bulk, scale, colours and height out of character, and particularly townhouse number 3. The setbacks to Hayes Road is only 4.7 metres, not the 8.5, which is the required standard. This creates an inconsistent setback pattern for the streetscape and will dominate the neighbourhood streetscape for the area, particularly in Hayes Road. The traffic and parking issues that will occur as a result of the extra, say, 8 to 10 cars on a residential block that had only previously had 2 or 3 will only increase the parking problems, the car noise levels and the traffic congestion in a quiet and peaceful area of Strathmore. Now, just because the rules allow certain planning approvals and planning changes does not, and I repeat, does not make these planning rules right or just for the people who will be severely impacted by those planning changes. The removal of 3 trees, one on site and 2 as council street trees, only enforces to me that some planning proposals totally disregard MV 2040 and our policies of Urban Forest Action Plan. The 5-bedroom building that is part of the proposal belongs on a block by itself, not on a block that's got 2 extra unit developments alongside it. This is squeezing of a large bulky building onto a very small allotment. This is an overdevelopment on a small land holding, and it shouldn't be allowed.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Gauci-Marucci.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I was particularly happy to second this one for discussion. I was not at the consultation. It was the day after my daughter was born, so apologies to the residents and the builders that I was not there. But I'm really interested to hear what the discussion is on both sides of this. It is one that is particularly difficult. It is highly compliant, but there are still obviously a number of concerns. So for me, I see both sides of this one at the moment. I do see that there are a lot of conditions changes around the dwelling heights and the crossovers access and the colours and materials schedule, but I'm yet to be convinced whether that goes far enough. So I will be interested to see what others have to say.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor say a few words? Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I was at the consultation meeting with Councillor Lawrence, and we had quite a turn-up of residents, which was good, and they certainly voiced a number of concerns with us, particularly around parking, neighbourhood character, and a lot of them had issues with the movements of the bus and how that down Hayes Road and how that could potentially be impacted with the addition of these dwellings right on the corner here of Magdala. It is a difficult application to decide on for a number of reasons though, and Councillor Gauci-Marucci has mentioned that. I guess there's a major inconsistency that a major non-compliance that I'm concerned with, and it's mainly the front setback on Unit 1 facing Hayes Road. It's less than half of what it should be. So rather than being 8.5 metres, it's around 4.5. And that when things like that happen and there's such a significant difference to the surrounding setback, I guess it raises red flags for me personally, because things like street setback, when they're not compliant, it can really strange the whole uniformity of the street. And I know that this is on a corner site, and sometimes corner sites are granted sort of certain dispensations, I guess, but because of the issues with the bus and parking that Councillor Lawrence has alluded to, for me, I think this non-compliance will potentially cause issues that maybe hadn't really been thought of. And when there is such large non-compliance, you sort of wonder if too many are being squeezed on the block, because if there was an extra 4.5 metres added to the front of dwelling 1, that's obviously going to push all the dwellings back and potentially maybe not have such a big dwelling at number 3 there. So it's a hard one. I'm happy to support this refusal, but obviously taking into account the res code and the officers' comments and the comments from the residents at the consultation meeting and the developers were there too. So I've taken all that on board and I'm happy to support the refusal, I guess, just because I am concerned about that major non-compliance and the effects that that will have in the long term.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
Would any other councillor like to speak to the item? As there is no dissent.
Yeah, sorry, can I just ask a point of clarification on the refusal? The refusal has states that the application doesn't meet objectives 5503 for permeability and 55045 overshadowing open space. Just through the chair, is that correct? Because the Res Code assessment states they're compliant with its standard and objectives. I'm a bit confused.
Vera?
This is correct. However, we follow instructions actually from councillor.
So so the refusal states that it doesn't meet the objectives, but the application does.
Correct.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I would gather that Councillor Lawrence considers that it doesn't. The officer's advice is that it does.
Okay.
Is that all the clarification?
Well, it doesn't clarify it, but yes, I guess.
You got a question of clarification?
No, I was going to talk.
Oh, you're going to talk, are you? Okay, sorry, councillor.
This is a real edgy one, and I know I've listened to both councillor seconding the motion and councillor Sharp in talking to it, and we have, I think, one of those classic situations about whether we could stand this up in VCAT and march through. I have every sympathy, however, for the question around the 5-bedder at the back and the bulk and the scale of that. But however, we've got some really interesting questions here around the provision of car parking, which is one more than's required. I had the same issue that Councillor Nation just expressed in terms of clarification, which was around permeability and site coverage, given that site coverage is less than half of the 750 square metres that makes up the property. I do, however, take note of what Councillor Sharp was saying about the setbacks. It is a really, there's a question about the need for uniformity and how the amenity of an area fits in. But I would be wrong if I was a councillor to say that this is one that I could really absolutely defend in a VCAT situation. And so I am a dissenting voice, but in a sense it was thrown open for discussion, and that's what I've done.
Thank you, councillor. Any other councillor like to say a few words? Councillor Boone.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just looking at this, the main thing that I see, as Councillor Sharp has as well, is the setbacks. And I'm one that loves consistent street setbacks. I've brought it up many times in Airport West before. But by reading through the officer's comments and by looking at the bird's eye view pictures of it, as it says, number 61, 63, 78, that's 70. They don't have a consistent setback along Hayes as it is. In terms of dwelling diversity, contrary to Councillor Cusack, I actually like that there's a proposal finally for a unit that has 5 bedrooms. As growing up in a generation where a lot of people can't afford to buy one house on a full block of land, I think that it's really great. It's probably the first application that I can think of in council that has had 5 bedrooms. I don't like the bulk and the scale of it. I would have preferred this to have been conditioned for a smaller bulk and scale. But in terms of how it stacks up to Res Code, I think it stacks up incredibly well. As I said, if the only thing that's really going to be able to be fought is possibly that street setback, I don't think that it's going to be strong. And I also read through the permeability, and it looks like it all adds up. So I'm not really sure. The officer's comments I agree with, and I'm just not sure whether this refusal, it seems as though they've sort of put a lot in the hat, but I'm not sure if there's a lot of substance. Thanks.
Thank you, councillor. Would any other councillor? Councillor Marshall.
Can I just, a point of clarification, and apologies, I was listening in. So with the point 3, I noticed the response to Councillor Nation's point of clarification. I mean, they're not matters of opinion, they're matters of fact. So either something meets the permeability requirements or they don't. So I'm just confused. I just don't want, if this happens to be refused, it's not something like neighbourhood character where there is an element of subjectivity around it. So I'd be grateful for your advice.
Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor. This motion was put by Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Lawrence has constructed his motion, and all we can say as officers is that this is clearly Councillor Lawrence's determination of an assessment of the application.
Thank you. Any other councillor like to speak to the item? Councillor Lawrence, would you like to close?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, I'm glad some of the councillors feel that 5 bedrooms are an appropriate size for a unit, because I'd hate this to become a precedent in Strathmore for the development that others would certainly take exception to, particularly those that live in the Strathmore area and treasure that peace and quiet that exists in that area, and how that area, through no fault of their own, could create a precedent that we end up with more 5 and 3 and 3 and 2 and so forth in an area that really doesn't warrant such developments. And this is the thin edge of the sword as far as I could tell. Certainly for me, I think that we've got to make a stand and say, well, this is too much. And if we start having setbacks that are not within the standard, then we're only going to push the limit on everything. And where does it stop? 7 floors in Flemington would be the next thing. Let's hope not. Anyway, I put it to councillors, and I certainly think it's an overdevelopment on a small holding, and one that I would hate to see go through. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour?
Councillor Lawrence, Councillor Rebecca Gautam-Marucci, Councillor Sidepack, Councillor Sharp.
All those against? The motion is passed on the casting vote.
Yeah, Councillor Nation, Councillor Marshall, Councillor Cusack and Councillor Byrne.
The motion is passed on the casting vote. Council Report 10.3 on tonight's agenda relates to a planning application at 86 Glass Street, Essendon. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Gautam-Marucci.
I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Would you like to read out the officer's recommendation?
Sorry, just getting there. The council issue a notice of a decision to grant a permit in relation to planning permit application number MV 638/2017 for the construction of a double-storey dwelling to the rear of an existing dwelling at 86 Glass Street, Essendon, Lot 1 on TP 680-221Y, subject to the conditions below.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Gautam-Marucci would like to speak to the item.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is one that comes back to us at council because the previous proposal was refused. This is a significantly improved outcome from the initial proposal that was originally 2 dwellings to the rear, and those 2 dwellings proposed were prior to my term on council, so I don't know the discussion at the time, but certainly from my discussion at the consultation meeting, the residents had a number of other concerns that have either been addressed through conditions, in particular things such as the garden area, the colour palette and the pool equipment location, or have been addressed because they weren't specific to this development, they're actually related to the property at the front of the block. So I'm pleased to see a much better outcome that's come before us.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lawrence, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I concur with most of the comments from my fellow ward councillor, Councillor Gautam-Marucci. This proposal does comply with most of the res code, the zoning GRZ. Setbacks are within the standard. Although the previous application was not so good, this is a vast improvement and reduces the bulk and with only 1 dwelling instead of the previous 2. There's no construction actually on the boundary of the block at all, which is an excellent outcome as well, which gives it a good separation. Ample setbacks, as I've also mentioned, but also on the upper floors, which is terrific. Although the proposal only offers small permeability under the 35%, I note that the conditions set down that be altered to ensure that the permeability meets the Moonee Valley planning scheme. Overall, the proposal meets the Res Code and planning scheme, which is good. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Would any other councillor like to say a few words? Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This application is certainly a much better application than what was proposed a couple of years ago. I wasn't able to get the consultation meeting on this, but considering now it looks a lot better. I know there are still a few objections, but happy to support this officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor? Councillor Gauti-Marici, would you like to close? Sorry, as there's no dissent, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Council Report 10.4 of tonight's agenda is a Moonee Ponds planning update. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Marshall.
Thank you. I'd like to move a motion in the form of the officer's recommendation with the addition of a point 4, which says notes that any changes to childcare arrangements in Moonee Ponds from Tudor Street should be focused on retaining childcare within Moonee Ponds.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Cusack. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the item?
Look, to some extent, this is information that we've received previously in one form or another, and it really brings it together. But we spoke earlier tonight about planning in the context of Racecourse Road, and we've got, as we know, in the Moonee Ponds Activity Centre, a case study in how not to do planning. And I mentioned at our planning meeting a few weeks ago that when I'm no longer a councillor and you can't code of conduct me, I'm going to write an article about how it all played out, because it is really a case study in how not to do it. But what we are doing now is officers are really sensibly saying this is not just about heights, and we see that how you make a community and an activity centre work is to focus on a range of matters, heights being just one of them. And I'm really pleased that our council officers have turned around now and have said, you know what, we need to look at the whole centre. We need to make sure it works properly. And it's, again, something that should have been done years ago, it wasn't, but anyway, sometimes you've got to find yourself where you are and try and make the most of what you can. Now, that's all a bit of a prelude to saying that I certainly support the idea of requesting that extension of time for the interim height controls to basically make sure that we can get that holistic planning done. It's really important, and the activity centre itself will be so much the better for it when we can get that right. And I know the council officers are doing some really groundbreaking work, in my view, from what I've seen, and I certainly can't wait to see the whole package of works. The other matters that are dealt with in here, I hope provide some comfort to people that the idea of the infrastructure needs are being, well, there's a plan for it, and that was what my notice of motion was really about, seeking a plan for the area to show people, you know what, we know that there are going to be significant demands, and here is how we plan to address them. So you can see in the report, and anyone who is interested in Moonee Ponds, I'd encourage them to read through the report. Because we can see there's talk about the car park, which is still subject to feasibility and working out where the best site is, and that will be obviously subject of another discussion. We're continuing to look for sites to acquire, and I'm really pleased that we have got our foot on 605 Mount Alexander Road. It's a really interesting space, and you can just see the potential it's got to help change the craziness and the busyness of the junction. So I'm certainly looking forward to seeing how that space is activated. I know, again, the community triangle, or the community hub in the triangle in where we stand right now, that is going to be an enormous piece of work in terms of the planning and the complexities that go along with various ownership arrangements. But again, that is going to be an incredibly important piece of work to help support the Moonee Ponds community. The childcare, I know there are issues with accessing Shooter Street at the moment, so I acknowledge the difficulties that that is creating, but one of the things that we have repeatedly said is that we are going to have a growing community in Moonee Ponds. So for me, the idea that you would potentially shift childcare out of Moonee Ponds is not one that would seem a very sensible one. But again, we need to keep an open mind about these things and look at the evidence and the facts as it comes through. Certainly, I'm one of the many people who has contributed to the traffic counters that have been around the Moonee Ponds Activity Centre, and that work is being done to work out how do we get traffic to move, how do we get, importantly too, pedestrian and cyclist movements to actually work in the activity centre when we are going to have new connections. But it's a really important part of the puzzle. Incredibly important, and I know some people are very sick of me talking about this, but I'll do it again. The streetscape works. Finally, we have a very clear plan for when and how we can fund what are large amounts of streetscape works that need to be done. Moonee Ponds, and not just Moonee Ponds, other parts of the municipality too, have not had that work done over time, and we are gradually doing it, but we now have a clear plan. And you want the place where you are, your activity centres, to be thriving, to be beautiful, to be pleasant places to be. And it's amazing, even relatively small changes like the inclusions of those pots, what a difference they can make to a streetscape. But there is a lot of work to be done, but we at least now have a plan on how it will be done and how it will be funded. So for me, it is pleasing to see that there is this sense of having a plan, about having some control over what happens, and about using this, hopefully, as a lever in which to get other controls in place. If we get this work right, then you can comfortably say, all right, we can plan for this particular area, we can plan because we know we will have controls that work, not controls that every time we get an application in, comes to council and we have that argument and debate.
Thank you, Councillor. Before I go on to Councillor Cusack, I'd just like to ask Councillor Marshall, in regards to point number 4, where you say to retain the childcare centre within Moonee Ponds. There's obviously central Moonee Ponds where the shopping centre, where Shooter Street is, but if you go to the extremities of the suburb, it might be closer if let's say we found something in Strathmore or Ascot Vale, which might be closer than the far end of Moonee Ponds. So would you consider within Moonee Ponds as the primary site, but if something is within proximity?
Yeah, I would respectfully not consider that because I have this same discussion with the poor people of Moonee Ponds who want to get their children into a kindergarten, a council-run kindergarten, and there are none in Moonee Ponds. So they have to go to Ascot Vale, or they have to go to Essendon, or wherever it might be. And again, to me, you cannot turn around and say we are planning for significant population growth without providing things like childcare, without providing things like kinders. And so, in short, the answer, respectfully, Mayor, is no.
Okay. Councillor Cusack.
Well, I certainly back Councillor Marshall's position, both in relation to 1, 2, 3 and 4. And Councillor Marshall has made a very good point about why number 4 has to be there. Just simply, I support this motion on the basis because we need a plan. This council has, over many years, not had a successful or a working plan for this part of the municipality. As a consequence, we've seen Puckle Street, the traders and the general environs diminish in their value as a prospect for community here. People go outside of the municipality to do their shopping, to do their other things that they like to do, and that whole thing that once upon a time, Puckle Street and its surrounding area was a great place to be. And it was a great place to be because it had a lot of foresight attached to it. It had the town hall, it had places where people could go and gather and do bits and pieces. We have gradually lost that over time. And the biggest challenge that we have right now is obviously population change. And that was pointed out by Councillor Marshall in her moving of this motion. And that population change brings with it critical issues about infrastructure. We can't just leave the whole thing to the hands of people like, and I'm not being disrespectful here, but when we go out and negotiate with a company like Cadence and say, well, listen, we want you to put something into the public domain, we're reliant on their goodwill. And that is not, I'm sure, what the community of Moonee Valley and the people who are residents now and in the future of Moonee Ponds will want to see. They want to see a proactive place, one that is, if I like, that talks about livability and all the rest of it. But a word that gets thrown around a lot these days is making the place beautiful. And so if we have a plan that does that sort of thing, that makes it function well, that makes public transport work well, that makes the public domains work well, how can you really go wrong? It's something that is out on, in for the out years. It's not going to happen tomorrow. But if we can actually start setting in place the thinking and get other councils down the track to pick up some of those particular themes, it will work very well. If we put it off again, we'll be in the same situation we've been in now, in the past. What do we do with a community area that is creaking, that is understandably under pressure because of growth? So at the end of the day, this plan will not only just benefit the community, but it benefits traders, it benefits the whole environment in terms of making places safer and also greener and so on like that. So I commend it to you.
Thank you, Councillor. Would any other councillor like to say a few words? As there is no dissent, I'll go straight to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. The next report is Council Report 10.5 times January is the review of the right-of-way policy. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Marshall.
Chair, I move a motion in the form of the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll seek a seconder for that. Councillor Nation. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the item?
So this is a review of Council's right-of-way policy, and our rights-of-way perform really important functions. There's that functional element of supporting movement, obviously, but in our municipality, particularly in the southern part where we've got our lovely bluestone laneways, they very much form part of the neighbourhood character of an area. So this initial policy was designed to try and provide policy guidance and fill what was a policy vacuum in this space where we were having developments seeking to utilise rights of way, and officers just didn't have the guidance. Sometimes in life, as much as we would love it to be black and white, it is not, and you need to be pragmatic about things. And even if you feel very strongly about something and you just want to dig in for the sake of it, sometimes you do. As I said, you need to be pragmatic and sensible, and this is one such situation for me. So in addition to tidying up some changes within the policy, there have been some amendments to reflect what have been a series of VCAT determinations in relation to some conditions we were placing on permits. And I think, as I said, you've just got to be pragmatic about these things and provide appropriate guidance, and then see how it pans out. We're also seeking through this motion to commence the process to actually incorporate the policy into our planning scheme, which gives it a bit more grunt too.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nation.
Look, only very briefly to say we've got over 68 kilometres of right-of-ways throughout the municipality that make up about 227,000 square metres, so square metres. So they are significant community assets. 3/4 of them are a council's responsibility, and therefore how we manage them, how we maintain them, and how we ensure that developments respect and appreciate and utilise these laneways is really important. As Councillor Marshall said, it is tweaking an existing policy based on some VCAT decisions. It is something that, as there are more or potentially more VCAT decisions in the future, hopefully some fall in the favour of respecting the laneways a little bit more, and we can even tighten up the controls a bit more. But yeah, happy to second this motion.
Thank you. Any other councillor to say a few words? As there is no dissent, I'll go straight to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 10.6 on tonight's agenda is Moonee Valley Racing Club Planning Assessment Special Committee. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I move a motion in the form of the officer's recommendation with two small amendments, and that is in relation to point 3, the addition of the following words. With the following changes in clause 3, term to amend the end date to 24th of October 2020, just to align with the council term.
Okay.
And then in point 4, to remove the hyphen from between Gauchi and Marici.
Unless you've changed your name. I'll see if I can get a seconder for you, Councillor Marshall. Councillor Gauchi Murici, without the hyphen, right? Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the item?
Look, I'll just speak briefly. Obviously, there's a situation where council is unable to form a quorum at the moment in relation to Moonee Valley racecourse planning applications. Previously, we had a situation where there was the matters were delegated to the Development Assessment Panel, but there have been some concerns expressed as to whether that is the appropriate way of dealing with the conflicts issue. So what this proposal seeks to do is essentially have a small group of councillors who can participate, be on this panel, and to make those planning decisions where they otherwise would have come to council under our statutory planning protocols. This committee will go for the council term as noted, and is comprised of the 3 councillors mentioned, Councillor Lawrence, Gauchi Marici and myself. It's important to note that meetings will be open to members of the public, as our council meetings are, and also the reports and minutes of meeting will be available online. So it will essentially be a shrunk down council meeting, but I think that this is probably a more appropriate way to deal with this issue, and I hope councillors see fit.
Probably just for clarification, as the Dare and Deputy Mayor won't be there, you might have to appoint a chair.
The terms of reference have a process for appointment.
That. Okay,
yeah.
Terrific.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Gauchi Murici.
No, I think Councillor Marshall's spoken comprehensively.
Any other councillor say a few words? Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm a bit perplexed about this special committee because it's only 3 councillors deciding what this entire city will decide in relation to certain aspects of the Moonee Valley Racing Club development, which, you know, it doesn't overly sit well with me that I'm a third of a committee that's making pretty huge decisions. And I know we're here to make decisions. I've heard that bash through my skull since I've been here, but I do make the point that I know there's reasons for councillors who are being excluded from this special committee for reasons of you know, excessive gifts and so forth. However, it still leaves me thinking that it doesn't sit comfortably with me that only 3 councillors are making very big decisions on a very big development that is going to be affording a great deal of impact to the people of Moonee Valley, and it just makes me think, well, where have we gone wrong?
Thank you, Councillor. Would any other councillor like to say a few words? Councillor Cusack.
Councillor Marshall has gone through in her motion to support that around this and discuss the way it will work and so on like that. The harsh reality is that our council has put in a massive amount of work into this over many, many years, and a lot of the big threshold matters were resolved at some point through this process. The critical matter that we have now, though, is for the remaining of this term of this council, is that there are a number of councillors who are locked out of the system because of a conflict of interest, having attended race meetings at Moonee Valley. And the point that is on the table is, do we as councillors walk away from altogether making some effort in this, or do we leave it totally in a delegated process? And I would have thought that as a collegiate group, we have worked very, very hard over a long time. All of the motions and agreements that have been put in place have been done by other councillors and in other councils, but they are equally binding to this council. And so there is a body of work that supports the decision making of all of the three councillors who would make up this group. And so they're not sailing alone. They have that history behind them. And it's not a lost history in the sense of who contributed to it as well as council. There were the Save Moonee Ponds people. There were all of the other community people that have been part and parcel of this. So concerns about making big decisions about things can be, in my mind, allayed to a degree because there is that history and there are those pointers. And I would suggest that this is at least a sensible middle ground whereby councillors can actually have still an adequate say in the future of the racecourse. Now, post a next election, post the next cycle of things, all sorts of stuff might change. And certainly the criteria that kills off some of the councillors sitting at this table means that they will ultimately be able to come back into the fold because the time period that are associated with the conflict of interest actually expires. So there are any number of opportunities down the track. But if we don't grasp the nettle on this now, there will be things run away from the council and councillors that I think would be worse to try and defend than having to think through what are the issues sitting at a table about a particular matter.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor say a few? Councillor Nation.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I would like to reinforce that the option other than this is for the delegation to be given to planning officers. Now, that might have its pros and cons, but we are elected representatives of the community. Now, obviously 6 of the 9 councillors are excluded under the conflict of interest provisions, but we still need people representing the community to sit around and make those decisions. We tonight have gone against the planning officer's advice on 2 of 3 occasions. So it probably shows you that as councillors we're more conservative to protect our area from areas and the heritage and development, and therefore have refused applications that planners have suggested approval for. So therefore I think it would be in the best interest of the community that councillors who are representatives of them, and only the 3 remaining that can vote and do sit around a special committee to make those decisions. I think it is a logical way forward. I think we're all elected to make decisions, big, small and in between, and that Councillor Lawrence, Councillor Gauchi-Marici and Councillor Marshall all should and do have the capacity to make decisions on behalf of this council in this instance. And I think that is paramount, rather than delegating it to officers, with all due respect, because that is what the community expect us to do. And so I really would implore my fellow councillors to proceed with this way forward to ensure that at least the elected community representatives are helping make the decisions.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor like to say a few words? I'd just like to also clarify, and as Councillor Lawrence did say, it is correct, there has been some excessive acceptance of gifts within this council, but there's also been where some councillors have actually only just gone over the threshold by a very minute margin, and that was due to the fact that the laws and the regulations were changed midstream. So there is, on both sides of the fence, the reason why there's a bit of conflict of interest there. So, Councillor Marshall, as I believe there might be a bit of dissent here, I'll let you close.
Thank you. Really, for me, Councillor Nation, the points he's raised resonate, and Councillor Cusack too, because I think there is a community expectation about what we should be doing in terms of our participation. What comes to this special committee or not will remain to be seen, and I would of course note that we have other special committees, including our Land Acquisition Committee, which makes very significant decisions and is made up of just 3 councillors also. So I think it's important to note that this is not unprecedented, and I think it is a pragmatic approach to an issue that has arisen.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 10.7 on tonight's agenda is a draft council plan 27-2021 Year 2. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Byrne, would you like to speak to the item?
I will. I'll just be one moment. Thank you, Mr Mayor. What this is to seek endorsement of the draft council plan, their Year 2 update. There's been some changes just because of MV 2040 being endorsed, which is the main thing. So it is going back out, and we will be hearing submissions on the draft plan at a committee meeting on Tuesday the 2nd of October 2018 at 6 p.m. here. It's a really exciting draft council plan. We've all spoken about the council plan before, so I don't really need to harp on about it too much, but it is really nice looking through how much work has been put in to really align everything along with MV 2040. For those who are interested in looking through the appendices, it's a really lovely breakdown for all the neighbourhoods, and you can see exactly what's happening in your neighbourhood. So and, you know, for example, in here for Airport West is to host a picnic event at Hansel Etzel Reserve, and it's really clearly broken down, so if you want to know exactly what's going on in your neighbourhood, it's in there. But in saying that, it's not endorsed. It still needs to, it is just a draft at this stage. So it looks good, and I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation. Thanks.
You, Councillor. Councillor Lawrence, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, this is, as Councillor Byrne pointed out, just a realignment of our 2017 to 2021 plan with the MV 2040, and the good news is that we are able to alter that existing plan to be more flexible in its arrangement, and it also gives the residents the opportunity to have further input, because it will be on public exhibition and submissions are invited, of course. So that's a great thing, and it shows how flexible these plans are and how they can be modified and work with the changes in the community as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor like to say a few words? Councillor Byrne, would you like to, as there's no dissent, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Next item is 10.8 on tonight's agenda, and is Capital Works Program Update. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Happy to move the officer's recommendation.
See if I can get a seconder for you. Councillor Cusack. Councillor Byrne, would you like to speak to the item?
Just one moment, Mr Mayor. Sorry, there's lots of pages in these. Just need to get it up.
Straight to the vote?
No. I think this is $35 million worth of spending, probably worth a few sentences. This is, again, just that we're noting the 2017-18 Capital Works Program delivery performance, including projects carrying over into 18-19. It's to the extent of about almost $36 million. Lots and lots of projects, of which most have been completed. In terms of some of the things that have been completed, obviously Fairbairn Park, the Airport West Green Spine project, the Travancore Park Shared Path upgrade, and things to be that are almost completed. I'd like to put in the Cross Keys Reserve Pavilion, which Mr Mayor, yourself, Councillor Narelle Sharp and Councillor Rebecca Goucher-Marici were at today, and were very lucky to stand there and accept a nice cheque from the Minister, John Aaron, of $250,000 towards that project. There were three capital works projects that were withdrawn, and to save me shuffling through everything from memory, there was some works in Rose Street. Obviously there's been significant changes there. Treadwell, and one more which I can't quite think of what it was. Some greenery harvesting work. Can't remember exactly where. So they were the three that were withdrawn. But of 200 projects, I think we're doing pretty good. It's the biggest capital works Moonee Valley has ever completed in a financial year, and bigger and even better things are due to come with East Killer Leisure Centre in the not too distant future.
Thank you,
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Cusack.
Councillor Byrne has basically said it all. The capital works spend in this in 17-18 is the largest that this council's ever undertaken. Part of that is boosted by the fact that there were carryover projects previously, and there is a concern, I suppose, that in the documentation when you read it about what is carrying over into the future. However, let's get it straight here. There's stuff that's happening in this municipality that has been put off for a long, long time, and there's a need, an essential need to catch up on some of these outstanding issues that are in our community. A lot of people will obviously point to the questions around pavilions and so on like that as a big consumer, and they always will be because we've got so many of the things. But it's also about our open space. It is about sort of work on roads and so on like that, about footpaths and cycleways and drainage and the likes. So our community benefits from over 199 projects, a lot of them extraordinarily complex and often hidden away from what a lot of people see. Drainage work to affect things like flooding and so on like that doesn't come to the fore except for once in a blue moon. And the Bureau of Meteorology will probably tell you when the next event will occur, but no one knows. But the things like planning for a future and being able to develop for a future also requires that we keep all of these other balls in the air and get them done. And I see from the evidence of recent times that we are moving through some very, very big projects and the weight is being lifted. I have, as a councillor for one, have been incredibly disappointed over time to see projects half done, 3/4 done, master plans never properly completed and the likes of that. But I'm getting a sense and a strong sense of the work that's being done over the last couple of years that these things are actually being pulled together. Maybe not to everybody's satisfaction, and they have different ways of looking at things. But when we what we need to do, of course, is continue to think about how our community build goes on in terms of building our community benefit. And there are some critical areas that need further work. And it's while there is still focus on sport and leisure, I think that somewhere in the near future there has to be a very strong focus and refocus onto that whole arts and area and the precincts that we have that can really generate jobs, that can really make things happen for a 20-minute city and so on like that in this community, and start looking at that. But of course, while we've still got all these nagging options on this that are there, we must address them as well.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other? Councillor Marshall.
Thank you. And it is a pretty impressive list of projects that has been completed. I think certainly, again, we've got some streetscape works. We can never forget our library books, which are loved. We know that people love our libraries, and rightly so. It is not in my ward, but I have never been more pleased to see a project completed than I have been to see the airport West Green Spine project. It was a very long time in the making, and at one stage felt like it was a bit jinxed, but officers kept on ploughing through, and we got there eventually. I think the carryover point is a really important one, and let's be frank, sometimes carryovers are because councillors make decisions that mean a project, or they might change priorities, and it means projects are put forward, which frankly will never be done in the relevant financial year. So we need to be really wary about that as councillors. If we want to make sure that we are using a limited resource, which is our the funds that we've got, we're using it to its maximum extent, then we need to do all we can. I know officers are working on this to make sure that projects run as smoothly as possible, but we have a part to play in that too.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor to say a few words? I wouldn't mind just saying a few words. I do concur with my fellow colleagues about the amount of work that we've done, but I'd also like to commend the CEO especially, and Steve Lambert, who's our Director of Capital Works, for doing such a great job in delivering this high amount of work, but also the other officers and the other council directors who have all had parts with producing this capital works from each and every one of the departments. So on behalf of the council, I'd just like to say thank you for a great job over the last 12 months. Councillor Byrne, would you like to close the item? No dissent? That's right, there's no dissent. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. The next item on tonight's agenda is councillor expenses and reimbursement policies. Councillors, do I have a motion?
Thanks, Mayor. Oh, sorry, who were you going to call? I stood up and started speaking.
I heard Councillor Cusack first.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I heard Councillor Cusack.
Did you? Oh, okay.
Councillor Cusack.
Mayor, I would like to move, as I said, the officer's recommendation, and note that there are some matters that have been raised separately by other councillors in respect of the policy that could be incorporated into it, and would like to mention those to you. So, with acknowledgement to Councillor Marshall for the work that she's done on this, there is item 7.16, which talks about removal of reference to mobile phone and data charges.
Sorry, Councillor Cusack, Mayor, just as a point of clarification, there was a later note, perhaps that 7.16 might instead have just words inserted at the end that read, "For the avoidance of doubt, this does not include cap plans where all calls and other charges are included in the plan and a councillor does not exceed that cap." Whether that might be something you might wish to consider.
Okay. Which is where I was going to, but I was going to take that. Okay. Then there was also 7.18, changing the wording to read, "Approval must be obtained in writing by council resolution." 7.64, which has changed the wording to read, "Prior written approval of the CEO is required for use of a hire car." The 7.13.3 to change the wording to read, "Council previously paid an additional amount on its annual MAV membership and received credit points that can be used for any MAV councillor professional development training program. The credit points have been distributed equally to each councillor, and the points are to be used as payment for a program or course that a councillor attends. Each point equates to $1 of training expenditure and will be reported under the section 8.3 of the policy. This clause will remain in effect until each councillor credit point balance is zero.
Excuse me, Mr. If I could just have clarification, is this an amendment we're hearing, or
No, I'm adding some points.
additional points?
Yeah, they're more about clarification of some of the matters, so they're not changes to it. They're not changes to the policy.
The original.
They are about clarification in some of those points.
Okay, I'll just see if I can get that up on the screen. Have we got that up? All those adjustments on the screen?
So 7.16. Well, you're fiddling on the other page, I don't know. Yes, there's, yeah, they're all right.
4, 5 and 6.
Yep. And so there was 7.61, which is the change of wording to read council will cover the cost of ticketed events of councillors invited by written invitation to attend local fundraisers and charitable events where attendance at the event has a demonstrated benefit to local community, and so that tightens that up. The 7.16.2 is made redundant by 17.6.1, and 17.6.5 is changed the wording to read gifts, benefits and hospitality policy.
And
Okay, so we've got that.
can I just clarify, Mayor, too, that in clause 10, there is also a reference to gifts policy. So it should be
So we
wherever
need consistency.
appearing. Yep.
Yes, yeah. So wherever the reference to the policy is not consistent with the name of the policy, we need to change that.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. I'll see if I can get a seconder for you. Councillor Sharp. Councillor Cusack, would you like to speak to the item?
Yeah, right. Thank you, Mayor. The policy in respect of gifts, council expenses and reimbursement is an important one that needs to be pulled into line. As last time it was changed and looked at was back in 2014. The Local Government Act requires that we look at this issue. There is a question that is also about providing clear guidance in relation to the two councillors about how they can use this policy in performance of their duties, including reimbursement of eligible expenses. It seeks to improve, obviously, the previous one, but it's also about ensuring that the work that we've done in this council to improve the governance of the council is carried on, and that there is clearly an issue about ensuring our accountability to ratepayers and the people who are expecting so much of us in the community. It's also about how transparency operates, and that it's not about councillors going off on a flight of fancy somewhere and then coming back and asking for money later on. The checks and balances are now well and truly in place. Of course, every council policy over time will always go through variations and some upgrades and whatever else, but at this stage, this policy as it stands. Now, I understand that there is a critical issue, that there's the elephant in the room here, which is around the mayoral car and the question of reimbursement of councillors for travel. And can I say that the policy has been strengthened in a number of ways to address this matter. There is a school of thought, I know and I understand, that would prefer to see the mayoral car disappear, and that all council activity or councillors' activity, especially mayors, occur through the use of private vehicles or whatever, and getting reimbursement at times when it might be appropriate to do so. The problem with that is that there is a question of setting a statement in place for the long term that doesn't necessarily equate to the needs of all councillors who might be representing this community as a mayor down the track. And that the question, and it is addressed in this policy by effectively offering 3 options for a would-be mayor. Not all of them relate to having a car, and that mayors can in fact choose not to have a car and to take other options as per reimbursement. For a councillor who's travelling outside the municipality to do their work, they are also in this policy okay to get a reimbursement for expenses outside of the municipality. It would be an expectation, of course, as the policy states, that you would manage that any travel internally in the municipality yourself. There is another clear question that while it might suit certain councillors to turn around and say that there is no need for a mayoral car, the question that is there in my mind, and why I don't support that and support the policy as it stands, is one around equity. Not everybody has their own vehicle. Not everybody is able to, with the amount of time and so on like that and the responses that they have with their work commitments or family commitments, to be able to find a way to get in to council, to go to the pool and get out a pool car. However, there is also an expectation that our community has that a mayor should be responsive, should be on time, should be able to work with the community when the community needs it, not just to be able to totally do this, do it at the in some sort of planned way. It doesn't necessarily always work that way. What we've got in this policy is that we're reducing the idea of the mayoral car from one of those old flash bloody Holden whatevers to an eco-friendly car that is part of a pool, that is consistent with being part of our environment policy, and that when a mayor doesn't need one, there won't be a car there for them. It will be rotated through the whole pool policy anyway. So it's not an issue in my mind that bears consideration about abandoning it, because ultimately the notion of being able to have a mayor who's able to get around the municipality and be flexible is a critical thing.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll just be quick. This policy is certainly an improvement on our previous policy. It's tightened a few things up and is certainly much more transparent. Happy to concur with Councillor Cusack's comments. Happy to support that. Thank you.
Thank you. Would any other councillor like to say a few words? As there is no...
Oh, no, sorry.
Councillor Marshall.
Okay. My microphone's on. I think councillor expenses are a very curious thing in many ways, much like politicians' expenses across the board, and they're certainly one of those areas where we're an easy target. You know, it's one of those like shooting fish in a barrel when you talk about councillor expenses. And for me, there are a range of competing interests here. We absolutely need to be clear about what can be paid for and or reimbursed, and transparent about it, which is one of the reasons I push so hard for the disclosure of our expenses on the website, and I think that is important. It is indeed a good thing. I'm very pleased to see everyone's come around to that. I know there were some who were supportive from the start, but it's nice that, yes, we got there. But I think in defining what we will and what we won't ask ratepayers to pay for, because that's what we're doing when we think about expenses, we always need to keep that in the back of our mind, particularly in an environment where we turn around and we look at cutting services or things like that and ask everybody else to, tighten their belts. We need to always be mindful about being very transparent and making sure that we've got a good reason for asking ratepayers to pay for things. I acknowledge one of the points that Councillor Cusack raised, which is you certainly don't want council to become the domain of just wealthy people who come from wealthy backgrounds or, are wealthy themselves or have partners who are wealthy and, can sort of flit around. I agree that would be a poor outcome. And I certainly don't want to disincentivise people who, from all backgrounds, to be able to have the ability to participate. So I think that is a fair point. And that's why for me, and I'll talk about this a bit later, the idea of having access to a vehicle where people need it is one that gets around that concern that I'd otherwise have. But we need to keep in mind that we are not employees, and I feel like we sort of almost revert to that. We get a councillor allowance for doing this role, but we are not employees. And we can't treat expenses in a way that we would if we were employees. So I do agree with most of the points in the policy, and I think most of them are really tightening up and improving things. I think most people out there would agree that council no longer pays for council to attend political events. I think that's a really important change, and I'm pleased to see that in there. But the big difference for me is the mayoral vehicle. And it's certainly better than the existing policy, which, and I know, Mayor, I don't believe you've taken up the existing policy, and I have to make it clear I'm not having a crack at anyone. This is not a personal, this is about a matter of principles. The existing policy provides that the ratepayers of Moonee Valley will pay off a councillor car, and then at the end of the mayoral term, the councillor drives away in it with no reimbursement or recompense to the ratepayers of Moonee Valley, and I think that is an appalling policy, and I'm very pleased to see that that's not what is proposed here. But let's be honest about being the mayor of Moonee Valley. You get paid about 95 grand a year, and that is before you're entitled to other reimbursements. It is a challenging role, I acknowledge that, and certainly the level of scrutiny, the level of complexity in decision making, the level of abuse has certainly increased even from the time I've been on council. So I acknowledge it's not an easy role in many ways, but if you think about getting 95,000 a year, and I would ask for a very brief extension of time there, haven't got too much longer to go.
Less tax.
So if you're looking at about 95 grand a year, if you're then adding on all the other expenses and reimbursements, then if you add on a vehicle to that, you start looking at a package of 120, 130k a year, which for the role I think is excessive, because the reality is that many mayors retain their existing employment. So they continue to do their current job as well as being the mayor of Moonee Valley. And I think we need to keep all of this in mind. There are lots of people out there, I tell you what, who work a hell of a lot harder and get a hell of a lot paid less than the mayor. And again, I'm not having a crack at our own very hard-working mayor. I would have a different view, I think, if we were in a rural shire and there were large distances that needed to be travelled. But let's be honest, most of the meetings and the events occur in and around here. There are other events that we need to go to, but there are other options, including the train that you can catch from here and head on into the city for events. My view is that the mayor should be able to fund their transport costs out of their $90,000 that they get a year, and that it's not an unreasonable ask to do that. I think having that access to a fleet vehicle, which was there, I would support that, but I don't believe we need to specially purchase a mayoral vehicle. But thank you, Mayor, for your indulgence.
Thank you, Councillor. Would any other councillor like to say a few words? Councillor Nation.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, there'll be no surprise that I concur with Councillor Marshall in stating that while I do note that this policy is a far improvement of the previous policy, that I still don't support the concept of a mayor getting reimbursed to use their own vehicle. Our previous policy was one that was extremely outdated and extremely open to exploitation. Even when not open to exploitation, it still enabled the mayor of the day to get remunerated or reimbursed an extensive amount of money for an asset that ultimately is their own. You only need to go through the past 6 or 7 councillor expenses reports on the website to see that there are amounts up to $7,500 per year. That's what the previous, $7,500 for a 3-month period for the Mayor in terms of transport costs, not yours, Councillor Sypek. I'm not having a go at the former Mayor, but just saying that when you put it to the pub test, having a policy that enables that sort of spend within a 3-month period is unreasonable, and I'm pretty sure the ratepayers would be fairly horrified to hear that. The other thing that
Sorry, just as a point of clarification, in the new policy though, it'll be capped at $150 a month?
No, I'm talking about the previous policy.
One. Oh, so you're
no,
not
no,
talking...
but I thought the motion before us had the ability for the Mayor to be reimbursed for all bona fide expenses.
For,
No,
A,
so yeah, so...
kilometres, but they would have to actually spend it. They would have to actually do it, yeah.
Yes, so they're being reimbursed to use their own car. I'm saying they're being... Are you speaking or do I have the floor?
Sorry, I asked the point of clarification.
Yeah.
But why did you should ask it through the chair.
It's all right. I'll give you the floor now.
I remember our new meeting procedures dictate exactly how point of clarification
Sure.
should be heard. So my point, and my point stands, is that under this new policy, for that exact item above what Councillor Byrne indicated, the Mayor would get reimbursed for the use of their own vehicle. I agree with Councillor Marshall that the mayoral remuneration is large enough at $90,000+, that reimbursing expenses for your own vehicle is excessive. The other part of this policy, which I'm glad has been tightened up, was the capacity for councillors to spend large amounts of money on professional development. Now, I am not saying we shouldn't be able to spend money on professional development, but we did have instances of...
Councillor, I'll have to wind you up.
Well, no, sorry, because the clock wasn't stopped when a point of clarification was asked.
I'll have to wind you up.
So
Would you like an extension?
I would like an extension if I could be granted it, but the clock did not stop when the point of clarification was asked.
I'll give you an extension.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Councillor Byrne?
Sorry, Councillor, just keep talking, please.
Oh, no, I thought I heard something under your breath. Yeah, we had councillors spending up to, over $10,000 to sit the Australian Institute of Company Directors course. Again, putting it by the pub test, and the fact that we are all elected knowing what our responsibilities are and the remuneration. I don't think sitting a course that costs around 1/3 of a council allowance is reasonable. I'll wind it up. I don't support this motion because it maintains the ability for the Mayor to get reimbursed for the use of their own vehicle.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor like to say a few words?
Mayor, can I just flag that if this motion was to fail, I would like to foreshadow a motion removing that reimbursement in relation to the mayoral vehicle.
Thank you. Any other? Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. A contentious issue, this one, for some councillors. But reading through the draft policy, the purpose of Moonee Valley Council for councillors is to ensure that councillors have the necessary resources to enable them to perform their duties as required. Now, that to me says you've got to have some resource, be it a car, be it an allowance, to do the job that we're asked to do. It's not a wage, we know that, but we've got to have resources. And on top of that, it goes on to say professional development is an important and necessary investment to ensure councillors have the knowledge and skills required to perform their duties to the best of their ability. Now, if we want to be numbskulls and we don't want to train and we don't want to learn anything because we can read it all in a book, then that's what we'll end up being, numbskulls and useless councillors. But if we get proper, serious training and acquire knowledge that goes with that training, then we're going to go a long way to becoming a very, very efficient, informed and clever council. And that's what I'm aiming for. And to say that, we can't have expenses for training and for learning and for developing our ability. Sorry, did someone say something?
Sorry, as a point of order, because that was not what Councillor Nation said, that's a misrepresentation of what he said. He was talking specifically about the company director's course.
And I would hope that Councillor...
I'll rule that. Would you just withdraw that comment?
I'm happy to withdraw that comment. I will address the comment, though, in relation to the director's course, and I've not done it, and I dare say Councillor Nation hasn't done it, so I would suggest that maybe he's speaking out of turn as well. So I wouldn't be passing judgment on something that you don't actually have participated in or done anything in relation to acquiring knowledge from that course. Other councillors, I believe, here have, and I believe it's been a very good course and a very, very worthwhile one to be informed and to gain knowledge and skills.
Sorry, Mayor, a point of clarification. Through the chair, under this new policy, a councillor would not be able to sit that course because of the cost of the course and the new limits that are being proposed in the policy. Can I get that clarified by an officer?
I could probably clarify that too. You are definitely right. The cost of the AICD course is a lot more than what the allowance would be, but that's not stopping the councillor using their own funds to supplement the requirement for it. So, yes, you are technically right.
Thank you.
If I could just have a extension, since we have had some interruptions,
Sure.
Mr Mayor. Thank you very much. As for the mayoral duties, it's just not for those who own expensive cars, SUVs or multiple property portfolios. It's for those that are getting from A to B who need that facility, and often in the least amount of time. I do know that the current mayor on several occasions has had to dash from one appointment for a bowling club, for example, and then shoot down the road to another one, all in the space of only a couple of minutes. He wouldn't be doing that if he had to hop on a tram with his Mikey card and go and get a trip down the road and do something appropriate. He needs his car. He needs to be able to use his vehicle for the purposes of council work and council, I believe, important work. So, again, and taking Councillor Cusack's point, what if the person who's elected to council and becomes mayor doesn't have the financial resources that other councillors, be that they could be a young person or even an elderly person?
I'll have to wind you up, Councillor.
Okay, but I just make the point that we do need to do this job properly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Gauci-Mirucci.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I was not intending to speak to this, but I think I will, given everyone else has. Almost everyone else has, and I presume Councillor Burnwell. You should second it. I think just to bring it back to what we are actually talking about, the principle of this policy is a significant improvement in terms of the governance arrangement for councillors in how we deliver for our community. And I think that we can discuss line items of whether $4,000 is a good enough investment in training, and from an organisational point of view outside council, I would say no. But in terms of what we're doing as a council, we can argue whether a mayoral vehicle is appropriate. But let's remember why we're actually here discussing this, and it's about having good governance over what we have access to. I have a cab charge and I've used it twice or maybe 3 times in a couple of years. So we are trying to discuss the few exceptions where people might abuse a policy when 99% of councillors do the right thing by the expenses and the resources they are afforded. And I just wanted to bring it back to that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Byrne, you're the only one left. Would you like to speak?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've really enjoyed listening to the debate because I see lots of pros and cons around the table. coming obviously from East Keilor, it'll be really, taking a step back from that, a while ago we endorsed the new events and festivals policy, so we'll be having a lot more events up our neck of the woods, Mr Mayor. And it's going to be very interesting to see how people can take public transport for the train that was mentioned going into the city when we don't have trains up our end, and it does take 45 minutes to get a bus to Moonee Ponds, but I know that we can use our own cars and we have allowances. I do get all of that. But anyway, I might actually, I don't know whether this is going to float, but I want to move a formal amendment that we can debate, that the training conference and seminar under 7.13.1, the $4,000 per annum per councillor and $8,000 per annum per mayor, I'd like to move an amendment that can be accumulated over 2 years.
Okay, I'll ask the...
Thank you.
Do I have to ask the mover and seconder first, or just get a seconder? Okay, we'll have a seconder with Councillor Gauci-Marucci, and I'll have to put that to the vote.
Can I? So I just want to, we'll
Have to
debate
it
this
first.
particular
Okay, all right.
point.
Under the new rules, feel free to go.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This wasn't something that I'd particularly thought about, but as someone that has obviously had a baby whilst on a council term, and Councillor Gauci-Marucci is the same, sometimes it's not necessarily practical to do all your training in 1 year, and as we've mentioned before, the AICD course is a big expense. Yes, we have a councillor allowance, but I'm a huge advocate for training, and I think that we should be encouraged to do it, and as long as people aren't completely taking it to another level, which I don't think by accumulating these sums they would be, it's something that we can consider. And it'll be interesting to hear what people say around the chamber.
Sorry, can I just have a point of clarification? The motion, as it stands for the amendment, is...
Sorry, this is to, as it is, and to add another dot point, that the that 7.13.1 can be accumulated over 2 years.
So just a point of clarification, the accumulation means it would expire after 24 months? Sorry? Accumulating just means it obviously carries over.
Yeah.
So is that meaning that only a 2-year period it can accumulate?
So at the end of 2 years, if you haven't
It goes back to zero.
It goes back to zero.
Yeah, or you could use it for the next one, yeah.
You're saying accumulate for only 2-year period. So if
So you can't keep all of your training for 4 years and then use 16,000. So yes, it would expire.
in the second year, you can accumulate from the first year, but when you get into the third year, the first year's
so you can't use the
accumulate.
first, but you could use the second.
The first 2 years goes back to zero in the third year.
A
No,
rolling,
the first-
rolling
no.
accumulation.
The third year would still have the
Still be-
second
so a
year's
maximum of
accumulation.
8.
1 year drops off.
Yeah, so
Yes.
it's a 2-year period for accumulation.
Can I just confirm with governance that that's clear enough?
Lee?
7.13.5 will need to be amended.
Yes, exactly.
So we clear on that, guys, or?
Could we just have it reread again, please?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so from my understanding is I think two years can be accumulated, but when it goes into the third year, the first year drops off. So you can only accumulate 2 years over any period within the 4 years.
No, it's all right. Clarification.
Sure.
Yeah, can I move that we suspend standing orders?
Yep,
to
okay.
give Councillor Byrne
Let's
the
move
time
suspend
to-
standing orders, seconded by Councillor Nation. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Okay.
So what, they can back end it, and
We're
with 2 months to go as a councillor, you can do your AICD course.
I do apologise for the slight interruption, but we're back on live streaming again. So, councillors, I will need to have a motion to go back into standing orders. Do I have Councillor Marshall and Councillor Gauci-Marucci? All those in favour? Carried. Councillor Byrne, would you like to read your amendment?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. For clarity, I would like 7.13.5, the wording to change to the total cost for a councillor per annum is not to exceed the budgeted amount unless council resolves to fund the gap or the council agrees to fund the gap. Unspent funds can be accumulated for a maximum of 2 years, not including the final year of the term.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll see if I can get a seconder for you. Councillor Gauci-Marucci. Do I go to the vote with that one straight away? Yes, I do.
No,
or do I debate it? No, we debate it, yeah. Okay, Councillor Byrne, would you like to speak to the item?
Oh, Mr Mayor, I spoke on it just before, so that's fine.
Thank you. Councillor Gauci-Marucci.
Just briefly, I would like to thank Councillor Byrne for the proposed amendment. I think that this reflects some of the concerns that some of us would have where we weren't able to complete training during our first year but would really like to participate in a more rigorous or appropriate development opportunity whilst we have time. Something like the AICD course, which was discussed, does offer significant value to our community, and I know that is open for debate by some people, but for those who don't know, I am a HR manager by day, and certainly development opportunities don't come as cheaply as people would like to think, as do public toilets in our community. So what you can get bang for your buck for $4,000 isn't always significant, and the ability to then utilise 2 years' worth means that we can attend a course that might be really appropriate, whether that's AICD or something else. And I would just like to reinforce that the policy sets out controls to ensure it's not abused. The amendment proposes that we can't roll it over into your final year, which is significant, but it also proposes that the development that's suggested will be approved by HR and deemed reasonable for the councillor to undertake. All those sorts of things within our policy actually support having good governance around this, and I reiterate that there are very few councillors who would inappropriately use development funds to attend something that's not appropriate to their roles because it would be outside this policy. So the exception, not the rule, for some of the inappropriate use, and I think that this is a really sensible suggestion, and I thank Councillor Byrne.
Thank you.
Can I just have a point of clarification? Sorry to do this to you, Mayor. Just the wording, so council resolves, that does indicate that it would need to come before council for a formal resolution. I'm just asking the mover and seconder, is that the intention by saying it, council resolves, resolve meaning via a resolution?
I think we all understand what
No, because the mover and seconder don't look.
Petrus?
Mr Mayor, I think that would be the intention of the wording in that clause.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. No. That's what I'm just asking if in that point 8, but by referencing council resolves means it needs to come before a formal council meeting for a resolution to fund that gap.
I'm happy to put the word however before unspent.
If it's 7999, it's within your order.
Yep, I'm just asking if does council resolve means it's coming back.
We're debating. We're debating again
Yes,
here now.
yes.
So you're asking for a point of clarification.
Yes.
Would you like the word resolved removed, so that way it just needs the CEO's approval, or does it have to come before council for every bit of training and every conference and everything that we have to
That's
do?
what I'm just asking because I'm not sure if
Can't just have the CEO
I think we just
approval.
remove the word resolved to make it easy.
No.
Resolve relates to when there's a gap. And if the councillor can find a course that costs $6,000 and they've got $4,000 in the kit, they would need to come to council to ask for the extra 2, and that's what the current in front of us says, and that part hasn't changed in the amendment. I'm sorry, I've spoken out of turn. But
So, just to clarify again, that would mean then that any training up to $8,000, should it be in a 2-year period, doesn't need to come to council for approval.
CEO just signs off.
Correct.
Yeah.
Why is this here? We're just in the...
Yeah, new policy. Okay, thank you, Councillor Nation. Councillor Byrne, will you speak?
Debating.
You've spoken, so you asked for a point of clarification. Would any other councillor like to speak to the item? Councillor Marshall.
I am entirely supportive of additional training as someone who, if I look at my adult life, has pretty much spent most of it enrolled in a course of some form or another. I am also very, very keen on making sure that councillors are skilled up to do the role that we need to do because it's a complex role. I would prefer that the CEO go through and identify courses which will provide councillors with the skills and the information they need, because the reality is that the AICD course provides nothing about planning that I can recall, which is pretty much at the core of so much of what we do. You can provide, we do a lot of having to understand financial statements. There are a dime a dozen courses out there that are not that expensive in the big scheme of things. The issue around meeting procedures, that's training we can do ourselves. In terms of strategic planning and how to do that, that is not something, again, that would be resolved by doing an AICD course, but it's a really important skill that we should have. There are a whole range of skills, and I would much rather be really quite clear about this. Do that skills matrix that you can do, analysing what your strengths and weaknesses are and where your training needs are. Because I think that's entirely reasonable for councillors to turn around and say, well, I don't understand this, so get me some training for that. But this free-for-all, to me, is not an efficient way to look at training. It should be needs and skills based rather than just, all right, that course, that course, that course. As I have mentioned before, I'm doing a master's, who's deferred at the moment, of urban planning and environment. And in terms of the subjects that are on offer there, some of those would be incredibly useful for the role that I perform here. But there is no way I could, in good conscience, turn around to the ratepayers of Moonee Valley and say, oh, hang about, I'm going to, $8,000, that'll enrol me in 3 subjects, and you're paying for it. Even though I actually think that that would provide significant benefit. So for me, it's not a good way to look at training, because we should be looking at training, absolutely agree we need it, but we should be saying, what are your skill gaps? What is the training you need? And here are the courses that will provide that. So I can't support this as is, because if there was more structure to it and there was a clear set of criteria and more rigour around it, I could potentially support something like that. But $8,000 or whatever it might be, over the course of 16 grand over the course of a council term, going to train a councillor without, again, being very clear about the basis for that training, I can't support that as is.
Thank you, councillor. Would any other councillor like to say? Councillor Cusack.
Mayor, somewhere along the line we lost the purpose of this amendment. And while I can sympathise with a lot of what Councillor Marshall was saying...
Mr Mayor, just a point of clarification and order, please. The original mover of the motion cannot speak to an amendment.
Oh.
I think according to our new rules, I think they can.
No, it's in there. Yeah, you're right, Petros.
Could you just point out to me, Petros, where it is? I think in the old procedures that was the case, but in the new ones it's changed. Yeah. Under 9.4, moving amendment.
It's moving amendment, so all councillors can speak to the motion.
All councillors can speak to the motion,
but
yeah.
But the councillor who moved the original motion, mover and seconder, cannot move an amendment.
Yeah. So the original mover and seconder can't move an amendment, but they can speak to the amendment. So count to the amendment. So
I can
councillor,
entertain
please
an amendment.
go ahead.
The amendment is about being able to carry over money from one year to the next. It is about creating a flexibility in the kind of opportunities that people can exercise to get the training that they need. We're not debating in this amendment the whys and wherefores of the Institute of Company Directors course. I absolutely can, as I was saying before, agree with Councillor Marshall. My philosophical position is obviously it needs to be needs-based. Any training must be. And I mean, I spent 25 years of my life as a trainer and also being part of the establishment of the National Training Authority to get that result. So I think that we can go down that track, but I think at this point, surely the question is, if our councillor needs flexibility to be able to access training because they weren't able to for some reason or other, whether it's health or whatever, that is perfectly legitimate. And so this motion should stand and be accepted. It makes no sense to do otherwise. Once we get back to the original motion, I'm more than happy to entertain the question of whether the AIDC has somehow achieved a level of prominence in this debate rather than a question of relevance and the relevance of other types of activities, which are also mentioned in the other motion. But I won't break ground in that space at present. So I think that we need to keep our eyes on the ball here and think about the flexibility. The flexibility of somebody who comes into this organisation who can't define what their training needs are immediately. They might not have any background in business, but they might need mentoring and coaching, for argument's sake. That might not be able to be put up together in 1 year. It might be a rollover thing. And so there are many opportunities or reasons why it might not happen, or it could be illness or something. So I'm quite happy with the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor. Would any other councillor like to speak to the amendment? Councillor. Sure.
Only to take Councillor Cusack's point a bit further, and training just doesn't involve the director's course, nor does it just involve MAV courses, but training also involves conferences, meeting other councillors and learning just as much from those other councillors from other cities, obviously, and shires. And that's, to me, where you can learn so much more than the incestuous relationship that we have sitting in here with the same 8 councillors, in my case, and the same with everyone else, every week. So I think training is a very broad spectrum, and it's not just the director's course, and it's not just MAV courses or other ones that are offered. There's conferences, and I see there's a Smart City conference coming up in Melbourne soon. I mean, that is where we've got to, I mean, not everybody's interested in that stuff, but I guess we've just got to be a bit broader in our thinking. So that's all.
Thank you, Councillor. As there's no right of... Oh, sorry, Councillor Nation.
I just wanted to put on record that any comments I've made and will make in regard to this amendment are not in any way suggesting training is not important. And having been to Canberra and been to the MAV on three occasions, and in my private profession undertaking training at least twice a year. So for me, the fundamental issue is not whether there's merit in training. I think the question is, how much of that training should the ratepayer pay for, and how much is a reasonable amount how much is a reasonable amount for the ratepayer to pay for a councillor or individual's development and training. So the 4,000 figure sits above 13% on top of what we receive. So whether or not that, and that's for a councillor, so that's the 4,000 figure, that's 13 or 12 to 13% of what we receive in remuneration. So whether or not that is a reasonable amount that the ratepayer expects to fund us to go away for conferences and training is at the crux of what I was speaking about earlier. It's not in any way stating that the training is not important. It's how much is it reasonable for the ratepayer to pay of our training, particularly when it benefits us in other realms, and how much is it reasonable for us to fund our own training.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. I'll just read our new meeting procedures so that way everyone's crystal clear on what we're actually voting on right now. So, an amendment once carried. So, if an amendment is carried, it becomes the substantive motion, and unless subject to further amendments and debates, must be put to the vote by the chairperson, but only after councillors who did not speak to the original motion have exercised their right to do so. So, this will now become the substantial motion with the slot with the amendment. And we have to go to the vote. Clarification?
Request that we have training on our meeting procedures.
That wouldn't be, well, we've got new meeting procedures, so I think we're all got our plates on today, so.
You mean it's added to the substantive motion?
It's added, yeah. So the amendment is added to the substantive motion, but it now becomes the substantive motion, so everyone...
It will become part of the substantive
It becomes part of. So I believe now everyone has spoken to... So you would decline to speak? I'd just like to say a few words as well. So, yeah, I'd just like to say a few words as well to the amendment. As there's been a lot of information bantered around here, I just want to make it crystal clear that I did not take a mayoral vehicle this year. I used my own car for that purpose.
We're talking about the amendment.
Point of order, Mel.
I know we're talking about the amendment. I know we're talking about it, but it's just a couple of points that I just want to make clear. And also, I do not have a council phone. I use my own phone and I pay for my own phone. But in regards to the amendment and training, I think we like Councillor Cusack said, he's got great points, and there's also, there's been good points across the whole table here. But there's also an MAV course which is called the Diploma of Local Government. And when I was on the professional development chair of the MAV, when I was the MAV rep, I developed that Diploma of Local Government, and that's specifically designed for planning, for finances, for governance, the whole lot. That is a great diploma to do. So even though the AICD course is predominantly focused on finances, but in conjunction with the local government diploma, that would be great. And as Councillor Lawrence said, every councillor is at different stages of their professional development. Some might, in the beginning, I think we all did like a communications short course in how to respond to the media and how to respond to any questions. There's also conflict courses that you can do through the MAV. So it's not just predominantly the MAV and the AICD courses. There, like Councillor Lawrence says, conferences is another form of training. So I do believe in what Councillor Byrne and Councillor Cusack have put in this motion. I think it's a quite worthy motion. So I will now, as there is no closing, I will now put that to the vote.
The
amendment to the vote, which becomes a substantial motion. So I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour?
Councillor Lawrence, Councillor Rebecca Gatcham-Ritchie, Councillor Cusack, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Sypek and Councillor Sharp.
All those against?
Councillor Nation and Councillor Marshall.
I'll have to take a course in reflective massage. I declare the motion carried. The amendment carried. Thank you, councillors.
Now we have to deal with this one. No.
Now, what are we dealing with now?
I think, yeah.
Okay. Now you can continue speaking, yes.
Thank you. I can continue. So can speak
Please.
on the substantive motion. Thank you. Okay. So just overall on the expenses policy, I think that I'm glad that amendment got up. I'm a huge advocate for training, and I think that it's an important thing to note that everyone everyone learns in different ways. Some people are really good at learning. You yourself, Mr Mayor, I know you love networking and listening to other people and hearing about how people from all over the state or country or whatever it might be, how they do things in their councils. I like to read things or read books and literature. Networking isn't necessarily one of my strengths and wouldn't necessarily be where I would, well, at this stage anyway, be using particular funds. But I think the main thing is that if it is accumulated to $8,000 over 2 years now, we still have to own it. It's not like it's going to be swept under the carpet. It's going to be on the website for everyone to see. And as councillors, I know we're all very aware that it's ratepayers' money and that it needs to be spent well. And I think that unless all councillors will know that it's out there for everyone to see. And if you're happy enough to own an $8,000 expense over 2 years, then so be it, because it might be really beneficial to the city. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who are watching this at the moment just thinking we want our councillors to be good and to be upskilled. And I think I think this has turned into a bigger debate than it needs to, but I think one of the main things is overall this is such an improvement on the previous policy, and at the end of the day we'll look at it again in the future and can always amend it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Marshall.
Just as a point of clarification, and Councillor Byrne in her debate then has just reminded me of it, with our conferences, the interstate conferences, the councillor attending has to bring back a report essentially to show the value that the ratepayers have got. With this training, what's the accountability back to the ratepayers? Is there a requirement for a report? I don't recall seeing one in the policy.
Well,
I'm wondering whether that's something that might be worth including as an amendment.
I think for interstate ones, I think that's quite sufficient enough. But for local ones, if you're going just to a waste conference at Melbourne, I don't think you'd have to
Sorry,
write a report.
I haven't explained myself well, Mayor. In relation to training rather than attendance at conferences. So I'd agree with that.
A conference is like training as well.
So that will come under the training budget rather than...
Yeah,
Yep.
I think it does. Yeah, I think it does as it stands. Yeah.
Yep. But in terms of providing, for example, I'm thinking the RICD course or the diploma that you referred to, do we expect some level of reporting back in the same way that we expect reporting back for interstate conferences, primarily on the basis of the quantum spent?
Look, I think if you went to a specific conference, like let's say you went for a waste conference in New South Wales and you did a tour in Queensland, yes, I would agree to that. But I think for the ALGA, like the Australian Local Government in Canberra, I think that's pretty much a lot about networking and a lot about motions that get put up at the conference. So
that's already that's already required. That reporting back.
I agree. But
my point is with this. So, for example, with the AICD course, just using that as an example, do we expect any reporting back or any ability to measure
so
the
let
value?
me ask you a question. How would you do it if you did your masters? How would you write a report on your masters?
I provide a summary of the particular subjects that I did, the skills that I drew from those subjects and the learnings and how they would relate to my decision making in council.
With respect, as this is a point of clarification, the answer is no, there isn't. Currently, as the policy stands,
I was directing it through the Mayor, who would direct it accordingly. No. Okay, well then can I move an amendment to include a point along those lines?
I'll have to get you a second and we'll have to vote on it.
Yeah, I'll second it.
Councillor Nation will second it. Okay, who wants to speak? Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the item? Yeah, so could you articulate your
that
motion?
Councillors will provide a report back to council after the completion of any training funded under this policy.
Thank you. Councillor Nation, do you agree to that?
Yes, I will second that.
Okay, Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the item?
Look, it is again, this is about us being able to almost acquit and say, well, we've spent this, we've done this course, these are the learnings and this is how it will improve my performance as a councillor and how you will be shown that there is value in that expenditure, that ratepayer money. So I don't think it's unreasonable, and again, we do it for interstate conferences. which is fine, and that was a decision to make. So I don't think if you're looking at spending $8,000 or whatever it might be on a course, that it's unreasonable for ratepayers to get a report back, just giving a summary of the learnings and how that will benefit you as a councillor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nation.
Oh, I think it makes sense because it is if the ratepayer is funding said training, then a summary for the ratepayer on the learnings of that training, but also to guide future councillors. If there's a report from a particular councillor saying, I didn't learn a lot, it was a waste of time, or it was very beneficial, it assisted me with making planning decisions, financial decisions, etc., I think that could only be beneficial for the greater group's learning.
Any other? Councillor Byrne.
Can I just ask a point of clarification? Is that a report to come back to council only when it's rolled over, or for any training, for any particular training that we do? Like 100. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Cusack.
I'm happy to support the amendment, provided it's not focused wholly on hard skills. If you want to just talk about financial spreadsheets and stuff like that, well, that to me is a mistake. If we're talking about rounding out a councillor's capacity to improve their language because they don't speak English as a first thing, to understand cultural differences about walking into this room versus what happens when you're down at the local, tenants union or something of that order, then I'd be okay with it. It's also going to be difficult in my mind, but worthwhile exercise, to think through that notion of, as I mentioned earlier, now that we're back in the main area, around things like coaching and mentoring of people to be able to bring them up to skill, and that's the stuff that they absolutely need. A lot of people might arrive with particular backgrounds and have accumulated particular skills, but they don't know the application or how to hone them, or, as I said before, to be able to do it. So there's a critical question in this, and I'd also would urge anybody who's involved in any sort of training, irrespective of what you think it might be good in the future, is to look seriously at if it's formal stuff, at a prospectus, and how that prospectus links into the work that we're doing, but also to be able to have that conversation and be able to have a fearless conversation in this chamber. If the chamber is going to be asked, for argument's sake, to fund a gap for something, it needs to be able to also understand and be careful about why it would possibly reject the gap if they didn't think it was worthwhile. And if that's based on a bias or something like that that doesn't make any sense, well, I would be interested.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lawrence.
Point of clarity, Mr Mayor. If one was undertaking the MAV diploma course, are they to report the councillor who's doing this course after each subject or after the end of the course? I have no idea. And I'd just like some clarity. What do you think?
I reckon you should report after every single day. Come home and
after each day's attendance?
Yeah. And let us know what you had for lunch as well, too.
Appreciate that it's a moment of liberty, Mayor, but let's be serious and be accountable.
I just don't know how much reporting we're going to do.
There you go, there's the answer to that one.
After each subject.
Is that right?
Okay, Councillor Gauchi-Marici.
I certainly support the principle behind the amendment. I think, though, there needs to be some discussion around whether that means that, for example, the induction program that new councillors undertook for our first week when we start on council, whether we had to report on every unit of that, because that came out of a training budget.
Point of clarification, under the policy, group training does not form part.
It wasn't a group training, it was 3 of us, 3 individuals.
Is that group training? 3?
So was that
groups? 3?
Part of your $4,000?
3 in a group? That wasn't.
The media training that the 3 of us undertook.
Okay,
was.
so I think
Guys, we're having debate.
I just think there needs to be some clarity around what.
Council provided training has a level of quality and a value to the ratepayer. I think that would be a reasonable assumption to work on.
Okay. And in terms of so can I continue my point?
Can you please continue rather than asking?
I certainly have no issue with the principle of it. I think there just needs to be some boundaries provided, and that may be a future update of this policy around whether that's $100 at a VLGA conference and whether that needs to have a full report come back, or how you want to actually work the intricacies of things coming back, because it may get onerous given we have now removed the councillor reports. So.
Okay, thank you. Any other councillor like to speak to the item? Councillor Byrne.
Thank you. I remember a governance motion that Councillor Sorais put up at the start of this term, this year. I can't remember exactly when it was. And I voted against it, not because I was against it in principle, but because I thought that it needed to be fleshed out some more. And for this particular amendment, although I'm not necessarily against it in principle, I think, as Councillor Gauci-Marici has said, I feel like it's just a bit of a tack on, and there's so many questions to still be asked. The way...
No.
Well, it is as it is. You've had it seconded, and
Mayor,
that is as it is.
Mayor, can I move that we suspend standing orders so I can clarify the intent of...
I think we've debated this quite enough. Councillor Byrne, please continue.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So, for instance, the way it reads at the moment is that councillors will provide a report back to council for any training undertaken. It doesn't say that it's paid training. It doesn't say what it is.
It's a matter of interpretation.
No,
it's under
but
that heading.
as I said, I'm just, in terms of how I see it, I feel like it needs to be fleshed out some more, and that's why
Mayor, sorry, Councillor Byrne was given the opportunity.
Are you asking for clarification?
I'm asking for standing orders to be suspended because Councillor Byrne was given that opportunity.
No, I will not
Mayor,
suspend standing orders. This has been debated far enough, and I feel that this is now starting to be hijacked by hijinks and all sorts of stuff. I'm fed up with...
Denying me the opportunity.
No, I'm not denying you. You had more than ample opportunity. I've been more than generous in allowing you to do any amendments that you want. This has gone far enough. We're going to take it to the vote. So please, councillor, finish your statement.
That's fine. I'm happy.
Thank you. Any other councillor want to say a few words? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour of this slight amendment?
Councillor Nation, Councillor Marshall, Councillor Cusack.
All those against?
Councillor Sharp, Councillor Sypak, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Gauci-Marici and Councillor Lawrence.
So now, do we go back to the original motion? No, we have to follow procedures. So... Sorry, I can put that to the vote? Okay, I will now put that to the vote as has been proposed with the slight amendment from Councillor Byrne, but the substantial motion from Councillor Cusack. All those in favour? The original with the slight amendment from Councillor Byrne. All those in favour?
Councillor Sharp, Councillor Sypak, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Cusack, Councillor Gauci-Marici, Councillor Lawrence.
All those against?
Councillor Nation, Councillor Marshall.
Thank you, councillors. Item 10.10 on tonight's agenda is the proposed new lease for the Victorian YMCA community programming over part of Cooper Street Community Centre. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillors, do I have a motion? Sure. The Cooper Street YMCA, councillors, I need a motion. Councillor Sharp.
Move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gauci-Marici. Councillor Sharp, would you like to speak to the item?
The YMCA has been in Buckley Ward, located at Cooper Street, our Cooper Street building, for a lot of years, actually. I'm not sure how many, but a lot of years. They're certainly a very secure and long-standing tenant who've got a very large following within the community. It's one of our only gymnastics clubs within the municipality. So happy to endorse this further extension of their lease.
Thank you, councillor. Councillor Gauci-Marici. Any other councillor like to speak to the item? Councillor Sharp, would you like to close? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour?
Councillor Sharp, Councillor Nation, Councillor Marshall, Councillor Rebecca Gauchamarucci, Councillor Lawrence, Councillor Sypack.
All those against?
Councillor Byrne.
The motion is carried. Item 10.11 on tonight's agenda is Grants Assessment Special Committee Reports. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Gauchamarucci.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would like to move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sharp. Councillor Gauchamarucci would like to speak to the item.
I will, I want to say briefly, but I will probably use my time, so not as briefly. This was the first time I've participated in the full grants program, and I thought it was a fascinating process in terms of the rigour and the assessment that's applied to grant applications. I think we owe a huge debt of thanks to the community members who participate in the panel, to the officers, and to those of the councillors as well. There is significant hours and hours and hours of time and effort in reading applications, scoring applications, and then coming in and discussing and voting on how those grants are awarded. So you can read the report and see the overall, but I don't want for a couple of pages to sum up the incredible amount of work that went into this. On a positive side, there's over 700,000 that was requested, of which nearly 200,000 was awarded. And it is really exciting to be able to support so many fantastic initiatives in our community. Whilst there are a couple of big dollar item ones, there are also many that are small or part contributions to the activities of clubs or traders groups or organisations. They do cross across all of the themes that we have as priority areas. And particularly pleasing is to be able to support the 29 community groups to the tune of 30,000 in the social support grants, which was an area which we hadn't addressed as well previously. So I'm really pleased to see that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just concur with Councillor Gauchamarucci. It was a very inclusive process. We had great input from our community members and obviously our fellow councillors who sat in on these grant rounds. Much debate was had regarding all of these applications, which was great. And I certainly felt like we were very conscious about spreading the money around throughout our municipality and also spreading the money throughout our different ethnic groups, age groups, everything. It's just a very, very well balanced, I believe, well balanced grant round this time. So well done to all the applicants, and big thank you to all the staff too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other Councillor Nation?
Just very quickly, if anyone is still on the live stream and has weathered that last report and that last item, the first round of biannual grants for 2018-19 closed this Thursday, the 16th of August at either 4 or 5 o'clock PM. So I'll say 4 o'clock to be safe. And we thoroughly encourage all community groups or unincorporates to apply through our online grant system, which can be found on the Moonee Valley website.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Byrne.
Just really quickly on that, if you're a part of a green group that would fit under our green part, and green in terms of environmentally friendly and whatnot, I'm thinking of some of the community gardens and whatnot, please consider applying for grants, because obviously we do like it to be, our grants to be spread over a variety of different things, and we seem to have we don't get a lot of green sort of grants, so and that's tabled in the report. Thank you.
Any other councillor? Thank you, councillors. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Next item is 10.2, which is response to notice of motion tennis strategy. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would like to move the officer's recommendation with the change to point 4, with point 4 now reading commits up to $70,000 towards the installation of the Booker Court system in the 7 Moonee Valley clubs that offer paid access to the public, in brackets up to $10,000 per club, close bracket, in the current financial year, subject to the provision of more detailed costings. Thank you.
Okay. Is anybody considering another amendment, or are we all happy with that one? Pardon? Would you like to ask? Okay, so we have the minor amendment. So I'll need a seconder for that. Councillor Lawrence.
Sorry, no, that was the motion.
The motion.
But didn't you put a minor amendment to it?
No, I was just changing the officer's recommendation.
Okay, all right. Councillor Lawrence will second that. That's fine. So Councillor Byrne, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is hopefully not too contentious. This response to my notice of motion that I put forward in June last year. It has been long awaited and it's very excited, and I'm sure the tennis community are really excited to see that council are really doing some work in this space. Basically, what the original notice of motion was that I wanted to know what courts we had in the municipality and which ones were paid for use and associated with clubs and which ones you could just walk up to and use. And then the potential of basically how we could unlock these courts and how we could encourage more use for the community. When we were both at the opening for the Airport West Tennis Club, there was someone from Tennis Victoria there who spoke about this Booker Court system, and it was quite new. So it was obviously now 18 months ago. And after doing a little bit of research into it, I thought, oh, that sounds pretty good. Let's have a look into it. And that's basically what the notice of motion was about. And now council has come back after doing so much significant work. I do want to thank the team that has put this together. I believe Luke Casey was a big part of this, so thank you to his team. And basically we're putting out a draft plan to be distributed to the local tennis clubs, Tennis Victoria, and the community can provide feedback. What the report says, in short, there's a lot about tennis. It's many, many pages, but there's 7 public courts across 4 council parks, being in Bowring Reserve, Bradshaw Street Reserve, Debney's Park and Montgomery Park. The Montgomery Park tennis courts are in particularly poor condition. We'll be receiving a report back to council later this year endorsing the master plan for that, and with that will be indicative times of when that will be resurfaced. In terms of the 8 tennis clubs in the municipality occupying tennis club rooms, we've got Airport West, Avondale Heights, Buckley Park, Doodagala, Essendon, Kilrace, Maribyrnong Park and Strathmore. We obviously also have courts at Riverside Golf and Tennis, and then there are the private courts at a lot of the schools and Catholic schools, I suppose I can put it. The Avondale Heights Tennis Club courts are the ones that they're saying they've got a couple of non-compliant due to excessive cracks in them as well. So we do have, this is what the report's come back with and shown, and it's also saying that there will potentially need to be funding, hopefully from clubs, from other partners, potentially from us, even though it's not in long-term planning at the moment. And so point 4 that I've just changed slightly was to install the Booker Court. I do want to congratulate East Keilor Tennis Club because they were on the front foot with this. They'd already installed it, which is a great initiative. It was something that they're pioneers in the space really. They went ahead, they did it really early, and if you actually look at the numbers from, not specifically from East Keilor, but from the 26 pilot venues, we're looking at a 70% increase of, 70% of users said that the system encouraged them to play more. 94% of clubs reported an increase in court usage. 55% of clubs reported an increase in club membership. 86% of clubs would recommend the system to other clubs. 71% of LGAs believed it increased community access to tennis facilities across their municipality, which is what we're really looking at here. And that other benefits for the Booker Court program included reduced administration impact to volunteers, greater ability to promote venues online via club website and social media, ability for clubs to accept online payments and increase revenue income to clubs, and ease of venue access for community members. I think overall we don't do heaps for tennis clubs, and up to $70,000 is not a large amount of money from a $150 million budget that we have. And I think this is a real positive step forward in the tennis space, and I'm really looking forward to reading what everyone comes back and says, as it is only a draft, and people can please have a look at it and put in their feedback. Thank you.
Councillor Lawrence.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Not much more to say. I think Councillor Byrne has just about read the entire report, but pointed out some good items. Tennis Victoria is to be commended for their support for this, and obviously it's in their interest, but tennis doesn't get a lot of support in our municipality over many years. Being a conscientious tennis player that I am, it's never been a priority by this council for as long as I can remember. However, there has been some spending in the last council period that was significant. But anyway, this is something that's going to really impact the usage of our tennis courts from all areas within the municipality. So it's money that's spread across all the wards that from Rosehill to Buckley to Moonee, and across all tennis clubs and tennis facilities. And that's, to me, a very good bang for our buck. We come up with 10, Tennis Victoria comes up with 6, and the clubs will obviously foot the rest of the bill, whatever that might be. So for the 70 grand, if we get a 70% increase in participation rates or people that are encouraged to play more tennis, then it's pretty good value for money, I would have suggested, from the municipality to local ratepayers and residents who live within our borders. So I think it's a great initiative. I think if clubs can obviously get more court usage, more funding from the use of their courts by hiring them out, and then obviously that'll recycle into better facilities for all our residents. So that's terrific in terms of tennis anyway. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Any other councillor to speak to the item? Councillor Marshall.
This, for me, we are getting to crunch point with a philosophical issue for council. And it's not just tennis, it's the bowls clubs that are affected, and it's this land lease issue, because the reason why tennis hasn't been supported other than an ad hoc basis, which, you have to question the fairness of that, is because of the land lease situation. So basically tennis clubs and bowls clubs where there are council-owned assets, they've got their foot on that, they've got exclusive possession, it's their facility for all intents and purposes. And going along with that is a requirement to maintain and perform certain capital works and a whole range of other things. I think we just need to make a call as to whether that's what we're going to do going forward, and whether there is another arrangement that we might come up with that acknowledges that we might need to kick in money, but on a fair basis and a planned basis, and it's the same with the bowls clubs, rather than just at the whims of individual councils. So for me, I think this is really bringing to crunch point, as I said, that bigger issue. We just need to make a call. Do we have these land leases in place? And if we do, then you know what, we need to stick with them. But if we are going to look at changing that arrangement, then we need to think about how we fund a whole range of sports that don't just use our traditional pavilions and have their seasonal allocations, but in many ways actually have their foot on that particular facility as much as the tennis clubs and the bowls clubs do during the particular time. So I'll be interested to see the feedback that comes back, but I think we're going to have to make a call at some stage, because it's just untenable. And I certainly happy to support the idea of the Booker Court system. We'll look forward to obviously seeing firmer costings and just seeing how it works in practice, because obviously we want to make sure where possible, that we're getting the maximum ability, because there's that real trend towards people having casual use, and they want to be able to just go and have a hit without having to join a club and be part of a team, all that sort of stuff. So I really hope that we're not just going to put this money in for a really, really small chunk of time. I hope that there's that ability, and we do actually do an analysis of it to see how it's working. And if it's something that just the courts are all at capacity, and we just can't get that additional use, well then maybe we will just have to stump up and think about more casual user courts with open access to all. But yeah, there's a whole lot of things that hopefully we'll be able to think about at the end of this consultation process.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor? So, Councillor Cusack.
Just a quick note on this. When I was sitting on the grants committee, the tennis clubs were consistently putting forward they needed a booking system, partially like this or whatever, but they wanted to replicate it. So I think that finally, rather than doing something on that ad hocery that Councillor Marshall's referred to, and being able to do something that's cohesive is a really good step. I think the other thing that is a really important one for our tennis clubs, that, and it's going to take a long time to generate because we need the numbers that Councillor Byrne was talking about, but it's about an income stream, and where there might be a small opportunity through this, as the clubs grow, as social tennis grows and that sort of thing, that there will be an opportunity to put money back into the clubs and stop this starvation that has been there. And the clubs, the point that I'm trying to make there, I suppose, most importantly, is that the clubs should get to spend that money as they need it for their club. Obviously, they may need to top it up with an application for more cash from us or whatever, but there's also those many, many, many little things that pop up that, you know, they should be allowed to do. So at some point, it's all about our policy. It really does get back to how our leases go and so on like that, and what level of, I suppose, okay we provide in all of that stuff. And it gets right down to the heart of procurement too. It's not just about the policies that relate to what we're doing with the individual clubs and that sort of stuff, but if clubs are going to do work on X and then they come to council to get some more dollars, often that sweat equity is discounted. It's lost in the system. And I reckon that somewhere we need to also go back to our procurement policy and somehow write it in there. And it's going to take a fair bit of finessing, but to actually reflect what our community does for its own resources.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor to say a few words? Councillor Byrne, would you like to close? No dissent, that's right. There's no dissent, so I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Next item on tonight's agenda is 10.13, response to a notice of motion, plant and tree health. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Cusack.
It's Richard. This is Richard.
My pardon. I'm moving the officer's motion. Is it? You want to do it? It's yours. It's yours.
Councillor Lawrence will move it. Councillor Lawrence will move it, and Councillor Cusack will second it.
Sorry. I'll move the officer's recommendation. Report,
Okay,
sorry.
we have a seconder for you, so you can speak to the report, Councillor Lawrence.
So what did he say? Speaking to the report. Oh, right. So thank you. Sorry. I'm just having trouble following what's going on. Look, it's great to see this very...
Like some training.
I would, yes. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you for the opportunity. It's great to see that, given the very dry conditions we've been experiencing, that the council officers have been doing the extra watering, and that this report details the trees and shrubs that are in need of substantial moisture. And certainly, given our current serious windy conditions we've had over the last 3 months, we certainly need that extra watering, and it can only be increased. Now, given the rainfall, going back to the report for 1 minute, the rainfall during February was only 2 mil and April was only 8.6 mil. We need to be very vigilant of our watering within the municipality, parks, gardens and nature strips, and I dare say I'm probably telling the Parks and Gardens people how to suck eggs, but I'm sure they're very much on top of this and very aware that it doesn't take a month or two of dry months that will impact the health of our shrubs and trees. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cusack.
I can only endorse exactly what Councillor Lawrence was saying in terms of moving the motion. My concern that spins off from this motion, however, is that, and I've raised it in other forums of council, is that we really need to be looking at the big picture around our approach to drought. Now, I understand that many initiatives are being put in place right across this whole council, that I get pictures given to me all the time about the wonderful things that people are doing and the prospects that we have of water harvest and so on like that. But at the end of it all, we can't just survive on our own. So our picture needs to be tied into regional things and into even national opportunities. And so at some point, I'd like to encourage our council to really give some serious thought to where it goes to in terms of, drought's probably the wrong word in some sense, but it is enhancing that whole water capture in the space of in a time when it's becoming a rarer resource. And we had a 10-year drought only 5 or 6 years ago. And so, or maybe 7 or 8, but they are repeating themselves on a regular basis, and the lifestyle of Moonee Valley as a community is seriously affected by it. So, just flagging that for the future.
Any other councillor like to say a few words? As there is no dissent, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Next item on tonight's agenda is notice of motion. Councillors, I believe we have no notices of motion tonight. So urgent business. Does any councillor have any urgent business tonight? No. Delegate reports. Do any councillors have anything that they would like to report in their role as a delegate? I'll leave that. Okay. Confidential reports. The next item on business tonight is the confidential report, and councillors, we have one confidential report this evening. So councillors, can I have a motion that this meeting be closed to the public under section 89-2 of the H of the Local Government Act 1989 to consider a confidential report? Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Nation will second it. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Ladies and gentlemen, this is where we say goodnight to the members of the public gallery and those watching on our meeting on the internet. Thank you once again for your interest in tonight's meeting, and we'll see you all very soon at the next meeting, and God bless.